And we are rolling.
Awesome. Man, it is so good to have you on. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, this is Edwin Hurwitz. And Edwin and I have not talked virtually other than I've chatted with you on Facebook in the comments section occasionally.
That's right.
But very talented audio engineer, musician, bassist. You're the first bassist I guess John Stewart was first bassist, but
John's great.
He's awesome. But you're the first person who's actually going to play music on this podcast or show us something. So would love to hear about your story because I don't know a ton, and I guess if you want to dive right in, I'd love to hear it.
Well, the cliff notes of my musical history started a long, long time ago when I was 3 years old, and my mom started teaching me recorder.
Awesome.
So her father was a classical pianist and a concert pianist, up through the 40s. He played Town Hall and all those places in New York. Cool. And then during the 40s, his best friend was a fighter pilot over in World War II and got shot down. So my grandfather's response was like, wow, life is short. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life playing other people's music. I'm going to start composing my own music.
That's awesome.
And so he, at first he started writing various types of pieces, but he quickly focused on piano music, and it was all post 12-tone modern classical music. And he did this crazy thing where he'd take his music paper and write it out in a bar 3, a bar 4, a bar 3, a bar 4, all in 7. And then completely ignore the bar lines. And he'd have like these crazy rhythms going where, coming from the classical world, you have a sense of all these voices happening at once. Mm-hmm. And so he'd have different voices going in different times against each other. So one voice would be happening in, an 11 beats or 11 pieces to a certain number of beats, and another one would have like 15, and they'd be going against each other. And it was crazy.
That's awesome.
And so he, my mom grew up with that in the house, and so, there was a lot of classical music. And so she played the alto recorder, I played the soprano recorder, and then my dad would play the tenor recorder. And we had all this Baroque music and stuff like that. And
I would believe music. It might actually sound good, though, with a whole family of, legitimately professional. Is that...
No, my parents were not really professional.
Okay.
Although my mom also hung out with the folk music scene in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the 50s.
Very cool. Wow.
And one of her best friends at that point was this guy, Ralph Rinsler, who later went on to become the curator, the folk archivist at the Smithsonian. And produced a bunch of records, including the sea shanty record that somehow got in the hands of Jerry and what's his name, the mandolin player?
Dog.
Yeah, so Jerry and Dog,
David Grisman.
Yeah, David Grisman. You get old, your memory goes. But anyway, so I grew up listening to all that music, like the Handsome Cabin Boy and all of that stuff that was happening.
So you're learning recorder, listening to folk music and also classical music, and then
my grandfather's music, which is atonal and very kind of I don't know how to put it. I mean, it's very lyrical.
Okay.
Maybe I'll have to send you some, and you can.
I would love to hear something. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Is that something that you found was it opening up your ears at a young age to be able to appreciate? Okay.
Oh yeah, so absolutely. And when I was 5, I decided to make him a tape for Christmas.
That's
so I just went to the piano and was just like bam, 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 bam. Because when you're that age, you have no idea really what the theories are behind what somebody is doing when you hear something that's that atonal.
Yeah. So when did things start to maybe click for you or set in where you go, oh, I understand?
Well, I picked it up pretty much, fairly quickly when I was playing recorder and understanding how people work together and playing music and all of that. And then once I was in elementary school, I started playing clarinet, and then a little bit later took piano lessons. And I have to say that throughout that period, I was pretty reluctant. I mean, you know how kids are. It's like, Oh, really? I
Yeah,
got
I
to do
have
that?
to.
Piano lessons again?
Yeah.
I don't know. And then when I was in sixth grade, we moved to England, and I decided to make a complete change and started playing the oboe.
Whoa,
Yeah. And
that's huge. What inspired the switch?
I thought it just had a more interesting sound.
Okay.
So, oh, and the other musician in the family was my great uncle, this guy Leon Rushinoff, who was one of the world's leading clarinet teachers. And he started
Whoa.
a whole school of study. So I got to take a lesson with him. And he showed me something really interesting, which was, I was maybe 12 when I went in with him. And he gave me a book to study from. And it wasn't a clarinet method book, it was a singing book. And his main point to me at that age was an instrument is just a device like your voice to get the music out. So
cool.
think of it as singing, and think about, how you work your breath and how you shape a phrase and, all of that. So that made a really big impression on me that lasted, throughout my time as a stringed instrument player.
That's awesome.
And
I would imagine those skills would translate really well as an oboe is a wind instrument, right? I'm not
right. It's very
okay,
it's very
okay,
similar.
Okay. Oh, sorry. No, I'm messing it up. What's the official categorization? Please tell me.
Well, the two big differences is an oboe is a double reed, so
Okay.
it kind of has a buzzier sound,
Yep.
and somehow that appealed to me because a clarinet is more like a sine wave, so it's limited in its overtones.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot you can do with it. It's a great instrument, but somehow the oboe just appealed to me because you can get a greater range of sounds and kind of dynamics. And then the other thing is that an oboe is conical,
Okay.
whereas a clarinet is a cylinder. And so that also affects the sound.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you understand the physics and stuff behind that?
Well, sure. I mean, if you think about it, if you've got a cylinder and you've got the waves going down that cylinder, they're just bouncing against the walls, which is a constant distance.
Yep.
And so it tends to reinforce certain things. Whereas an oboe being a conical shape, the sounds just sort of come out more and you get a lot more of the high frequencies.
Interesting.
And yeah, I mean, imagine listening to a tube versus listening to a horn on a speaker. If you run a speaker through a tube, it's going to get that really tubular sound.
Whoa.
And if you listen to it through a cone, it opens up.
It's way That's probably the most beautiful demonstration I've ever seen, especially over Zoom. That's
I know,
awesome.
right? So
Wow.
but it's one of those things that when you're playing the clarinet, you're hearing the sound and you sort of feel it. And then you've also got to have the posture. You've got to have the embouchure and the way your diaphragm supports everything. But with an oboe, it's different. It's like it creates this buzz in your head. And when you get into the center of each note, it like expands.
Wow.
It's a really intense thing.
So you were playing oboe from age 12. What, did you start when you were 12 or was that a little
Yeah, I
younger?
started when I was
Sixth-
at the end of 12.
sixth
So
grade. Cool.
So we spent the year in London, and then I came back. And while I was there, I got to do some really interesting stuff. I went to this school that, their school system is a little bit different. So the difference between private and public schools can be, I guess, it's maybe sort of like the charter schools.
Gotcha.
But the school that I went to had this guy come in to do musical projects that were really far out. And so he had me play these oboe parts that were just, there was poetry going on and dance. And this is like
Awesome.
1973 and,
Wow.
all this crazy stuff. And then also while we were there, my school was right next to this venue called the Roundhouse, which is where Jimi Hendrix played and, Pink Floyd would play there all the time. And so my mom took me and my little brother to go see this performance, which was, they billed it as a modern day Robinson Crusoe. So it was, I guess it was in a way like a musical.
Yeah.
And they had and the Roundhouse had been an old railroad roundhouse. So it's a big round building, stone, and they have seats built in. And then they had like 3 or 4 stages, and so the action would move from all these different stages. They
That's
had
awesome.
two rock bands set up and playing with and against each other. And at one point, like, we're watching everything, and then the spotlight swings over to where we are, and there's a hammock set up with this guy who gets up, who's totally naked, and starts singing. And there's these 2 little British women in front of us, and they're saying, "Oh, he's got no clothes on. Look at him."
This is 1973.
Yeah, so there was a lot of experimental stuff going on
That's wild.
in those days.
So, was there what was the reason for the move to London? Was that a work-related thing, or?
My dad was a professor at Boston University. He was the chairman of the art department, so he got a sabbatical and moved us over there.
That's too cool.
And then I came back that summer, and I'd started going to music camp when I was 11. To sleep away, stay away for a month, music camp. And
Full-on hardcore music camp.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't that hardcore. I went to more hardcore ones later.
Okay.
But it was pretty intense. I mean, the first night that I showed up, they had a movie night for the whole camp, and they showed us Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah. Great movie.
Yeah, for an 11-year-old away from home for the first time.
This is what it's going to be like here. If you don't
That's right.
Don't behave.
And so that was pretty cool. I mean, we had private lessons, I think, once or twice a week, and then smaller orchestras and choruses and things like that.
So that's a classical music format you're doing.
Mostly classical. The music camp had some things that stretched out. And another big influence on me when I was there was a drummer. God, what was his name? Matt. I have Matt Chamberlain in my head, but that's not right. But his dad had been a big band drummer. And so he had this drum kit there, which was apparently the largest kit with calfskin heads on it.
Whoa.
It was really old school.
Yeah.
And this guy was an amazing drummer. He had like all this crazy hair, and he would like drum, and people would come check him out. And he had this look that would like look right through you.
You want to see what he has to say, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, he had one of those magnetic personalities. So when he wasn't around, I would like sneak over and play his drum kit for a little while.
It's too cool. Is that a brushes only on calfskin, or?
Oh no,
No
it was
sticks?
like thundering rock and roll. I mean, he could do the jazz stuff, but he was going way beyond.
That's
And
awesome.
I mean, he was so inspiring. And so also around this time, so we got back that summer of 1973.
And this is back to Boston?
Back to Boston. Well, Newton, outside of Boston.
Cool.
And at that point, I was going into 7th grade. And, I wasn't a great oboe player, but I'd become proficient. I could sight read. I knew all of the basics. And I joined the orchestra that was at my junior high school. And there was a lot of remedial work to be done with some of my classmates.
Okay.
So myself and the flute player were pretty much left to our own devices. And it turned out that he knew how to play rock and roll. So we were hanging out in the back room with the electric instruments. And at first, I just like watch him play electric guitar, electric piano, and play Chuck Berry tunes and stuff like that. And finally it's like, look, I want to play with you. What's going on? How can I do this?
That's awesome.
I used this. They had a Heyman bass, which was this terrible thing with like really high action, and it's basically a Sears bass, but and he didn't really tell me anything. He would say, all right, you can start on this note, and then here's the song. So I would just play along with him and try to figure out where the notes were. Wow. And then we decided to create a band. Awesome. And so we found a keyboard player, and the drummer was always the big problem, finding a good drummer.
When hasn't it been?
I know, right? No, there's great drummers out there.
Seriously, but they're all in 6 bands.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the drummer I play with now, Christian Teal, is a monster, but he does play with all kinds of bands. He also plays on this show called E-Town, which is sort of, it's like Boulder's version of the Chris Thile show.
Oh, cool. I didn't even know Chris Thile had a show. That's awesome.
Yeah, he took over Prairie Home Companion.
I've been out of the loop for this. This is what channel? Is this a channel thing or is this an
NPR.
online thing?
It's on NPR, yeah.
Very cool.
And so this is the local Colorado Public Radio, and they have all kinds of people coming in. And so he played with Bob Weir. He plays with, just everybody in the kind of Americana, blues, some rock and roll.
Sweet.
So he's played with hundreds of people, and he kind of comes from that because his dad was Phil Teal, who was the first call bass trombone player in L.A., who played on hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of albums.
So stuff I've heard without a doubt.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Okay.
Like,
wow.
Even like TV shows and, all that stuff.
That would be a good gig to be
I know,
What
right?
years would that have been? 70s, 80s, 70s?
Yeah, probably 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s.
Okay. Wow.
Phil just passed away last year, so,
Man. Wow.
he's an interesting person.
That's
but he
crazy.
passed on like this passion to his son, Christian, who's our drummer.
Who's still...
And Christian, he has the ability, well, first of all, he can chart any tune within like 30 seconds, it appears. Like
That's
he's
a beautiful skill.
Oh man, he just hears it, he knows what it is, and he can play it. And he also plays all this like exotic percussion stuff too. So
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But I don't want to go too off track from you starting a rock and roll band, but on the drummer subject, what your band? What kind of tell us about your band really quick.
Well, we'll get there.
Okay, cool.
It's a long.
So you guys started a rock and roll band. You know music, but you don't know necessarily a stringed instrument approach yet. So this is bass came to you via self-teaching initially. Yeah,
just picking it up and going for it. So
Awesome.
The first tune that I learned was All Along the Watchtower. So 3 chords.
Beautiful. Yep.
How hard can that be?
Hopefully
And then we started. And then we started playing some Muddy Waters tunes.
Awesome.
And, at that point, I didn't even know the names of the notes. So what I was figuring out in my head was a rudimentary version of music theory. Because very quickly I learned, okay, this one will have a minor third, this one will have a major third. Not really naming it as such, but if I'm in A, avoid that fret, but this fret sounds good.
Yeah.
And then, flat sevens and major sevenths. All that stuff came to me because of what I was hearing. And, really cool. It sort of developed into a typical high school rock and roll band. So we played from 7th grade until the year after high school.
How awesome.
But also during that 7th grade year, my little sister's babysitter left a copy of Europe 72 at the house. And I found this old record player with like tubes and all this crazy stuff. Like it had serious bottom end. It was great.
That's awesome.
And I started playing all the records that I could find in the house. And so Europe 72 was, at first it was like, oh, this is cool. And then the epilogue and prologue come along. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? Because it reminded me in a way of, the freedom of expression that my grandfather's music had. And then, the stuff that I'd done on oboe when I was in London, doing the crazy experimental multi-sensory stuff.
That's awesome.
I started listening much more closely. The only problem with the record player is they had this monstrous tone arm, so it would go about 2/3 of the way through the record and stop and gouge a groove right there. So for years, whenever I listened to Tennessee Jet, I'd always hear, my doggy, my doggy, my doggy. And so I destroyed a lot of records.
That's a bummer.
Yeah.
But also, I think it's probably worth it to be able to have that experience, like falling in love at such a young age and starting to appreciate connecting the stuff that you heard in early childhood and be able to, because it's always high school when you start to listen and hear things that you're really clicking with. At least was for me and for everybody I've talked to, it seems. So
oh sure, those are the formative years.
Definitely. So Europe 72 is the first thing you hear from the Dead. Is this did it kind of take off from there, or was it slow?
I was like, I need more of this.
You're on the bus.
This is what I need.
That's
and
awesome.
It also turned out that my best friend from all the way through elementary school's older brothers were way into the Dead. His oldest brother especially. So he went to go see the shows at the Ark in the 60s.
Okay. Wow.
And all of that stuff. So by the time I started getting really into it, he was getting over it. And so the band was his new favorite music, but still it was,
You went from the Dead to the band.
Yeah, I mean,
get
I
that.
think he went, he went through the psychedelic hellscape.
Okay,
and
that's true.
Came out the other side because he was there when it happened.
So if you survived it and stayed intact, then you might want to venture
Yeah.
to something more calming, like the band.
Yeah, exactly. But they had a lot of the records, and that's where I discovered them.
Awesome.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
no,
Continue.
you first.
I was just a bass player. I'm so curious about your process because, especially having that much training at a young age on other instruments, like the ability to teach yourself, and even like teaching yourself music theory without necessarily knowing that it's theory. How long did that last? That exploration of just you and a bass before you started to go, okay, I kind of want to like take it. Further
that was
on
right
educational.
away.
What's that?
That was right away.
Okay, cool.
So, but I didn't actually own a bass for a while.
Huh.
I didn't have much money in high school, and then at first I thought I wanted to play guitar. I started listening to a lot of what Weir was doing and listening to the parts, and then when you delve into that and you start hearing how all the parts work together, there's a lot of stuff that's really interesting, and that appealed to me. Plus, I could read in the treble clef, so that sort of felt like maybe that would be an easier way to go. But the bass just really stuck. And then once I was in high school, it became a lot more part of what I wanted to do.
Awesome.
And
so
then,
ninth grade and on or was it a certain part of high school that you're
yeah.
really?
But also I was continuing to play the oboe, and then I went to other music camps that were a lot more serious. The first one was music in the morning, camp stuff in the afternoon.
Okay, cool.
And then so I went to a much smaller one in Western Massachusetts where you have an hour lesson every day, 2 chamber groups every day, orchestra and chorus every day.
Oh, wow.
And the counselor, there was nobody there who wasn't a musician. So there were no like counselors just there for disciplining
to manage
kids or anything.
kids. Yeah.
So think about it. You're in this place, you're in high school or, late junior high school, going into high school.
Yeah.
And all the adults there are musicians in their 20s and early 30s.
Wow.
And so, they're on their own trip that,
Yeah.
as we know musicians are in their at that time in their life. And, for instance, there was, and they were all amazing musicians. They were, some of the people from the Boston Symphony or taught at Boston University and places like that. And
Was
so
it intimidating for you going into something like that, or did it feel like home to?
it was great.
Okay.
It was awesome, but it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so, when you go into these chamber groups of, trios to octets or whatever, and you've got a coach who is highly skilled and has crazy ears, that's really where I learned how to rehearse, how to play in an ensemble,
Cool.
what dynamics means,
Yep.
and all of that. And, we would rehearse as a group, one measure over and over and over and over until the trajectory of that measure made perfect sense, where it was coming from and where it's going.
Wow. So maybe having an extra heavy arm on your record player was good because it got you in the habit of listening.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I don't know. Those
Wow.
by the time I hit that, I bought a real turntable and
Thank
all
God.
that stuff.
So
And,
that was a consistent. Is that a summer camp thing that you did throughout
Yeah,
high school then?
so I did that for, let's see, maybe 3 years, 4 years, something like that.
Cool.
And then my high school, the high school I went to is a very small high school in Boston. And the music teacher was really interesting. He had been a drill sergeant in the Marines,
Wow.
and he'd done all this crazy stuff. And he was also a musician who had a really wide range of influence. And so the entire school is 130 students. And out of that, including the faculty, he built an orchestra and a chorus. And so there were a lot of people in there who were not in the chorus especially, who were not really trained musicians, they had to read music rudimentarily so they could figure out where they were.
Yep.
But we were doing everything. Like, one of the highest moments of my life was playing the first oboe part in the Bach B minor Mass. So
cool.
I don't know if you know how that's set up. It's like a 3-hour piece, and there's a chamber orchestra, an entire choir, soloists in the choir, and then a pipe organ.
Oh my.
And the first oboe part is more or less like full-on melody the whole time. I mean, when it's not soloing.
How'd your lips feel after that?
Well, being an oboe player is like being a long-distance runner. You have to practice 3 or 4 hours a day just to be able to pick it up and be comfortable.
That's a lot
But
of work.
playing that in a church with all that stuff going on around you,
That's too cool.
it's amazing. And so we played stuff like that, and then we did modern stuff with like tone clusters where people are singing like microtones apart. And, it was an amazing thing.
You had was the drill sergeant.
He was great.
He was able to like pick up on that and on the.
But that was his thing. He brought it to everybody.
That's incredible.
Oh, yeah. And he inspired everybody to do this amazing stuff.
How awesome too that it's including, like people from the community too, or from the.
Oh,
from
yeah. The whole
faculty.
school was, it was very inclusive.
That's awesome.
And so, the summer before we did the B minor Mass, I shedded that whole summer and worked on it with my oboe teacher and really got it together so that when I went in, I would be prepared.
What does practicing that look like once you've gotten your rough segments? Kind of, because I would imagine if there's any really crazy parts, you're gonna want to go over those and work out the intricacies. But when you have a giant piece, it's still on paper, correct? That you're able to read and reference.
Yeah.
But what are you doing for like memorization or muscle memory? Are you practicing for the whole thing 3 hours? Do you go through and work out the problem parts?
Yeah, I'd first go through and work out the problem parts.
Okay.
And so there's fingering issues, and then there's also breathing issues.
Oh my God. You have so many extra things to worry about.
Phrasing issues. Well, here's the truth, is that all of these things apply to every person playing every kind of music.
That's
and
true.
a lot of people just don't think about it. It's if music is your life, these are the things that you get into.
Yep. That's beautiful.
And so then the last music camp that I went to was this place called Apple Hill, which is even more like all music, very heavy duty musicians.
The face you're making makes me think like extremely difficult workouts daily.
Yeah, exactly. So it was pretty much play music all day with these very heavy cats and then play soccer.
Oh.
They had these,
Soccer was just the preferred game, or was it?
yeah,
integrated
it was just the thing.
Okay. That's awesome.
And we had a couple guys there who were from South America who were just monster soccer players.
That's awesome.
But there was also a lot of stuff going on. Basically, there were complaints from parents that their kids were coming back a little bit more experienced in the world of sex and drugs than they would prefer. And,
Camp in the 70s. What are you going to do?
Yeah, right. And so there was one afternoon where the director of the camp comes up, and there was one of the guys, the main maintenance guy, was this hippie who lived in this shack with long hair and big dead head and everything. And the two of them split a BMW motorcycle. And
That's
so Gene
hilarious.
comes up to me and goes, "Hey, man, you want to come with me down to the corner store? It's like in the woods of New Hampshire." So I'm like, "Sure, let's do this." And I'm out there, shorts, flip-flops, T-shirt, no helmet, no jacket, going 80 miles an hour down these back roads, being driven by the guy who's personally responsible for every person in the camp. It was crazy.
That's insanity. Oh my God, I can't even imagine.
But it was awesome. And, like he gave a concert of the Bach cello suites. And, it's just, you have these experiences in classical music that I think are really important.
Yeah.
In terms of understanding the expression of the human condition and things like that. And it's something that reaches across the centuries.
Yep.
And at the second music camp that I went to, one of the counselors in my dorm was from New York. He was a viola player. And, I said, "So, you were around during those days. Did you ever go to the Fillmore? And he's like, yeah, I went a few times, but the only band I could really listen to was the Grateful Dead. They played with the intensity of a string quartet.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Ooh, that just made a bunch of things click in my head.
And then what was really crazy is that the next year I took psychology in high school.
Cool.
And we had this textbook, and I opened up the textbook, and there's a chapter on creativity. And so on one side of the book, there's actually a picture from my music camp with a string quartet playing. And on the other side is the Grateful Dead in the park, like circa 1966. And their whole thesis was, it is doubtful that these two groups of musicians would agree on what constitutes creativity. It's like, are you kidding me? This guy's just telling me that the Grateful Dead are his favorite of all these bands. And you have Phil and all these guys who are deep into classical music.
Yep.
So you never know.
I have so many questions I want to get to. That's amazing. What a cool, just an alignment of the stars, I guess, for something like that, for you to see it and then go.
Well, my life seems to be full of that kind of thing. So
that's beautiful. So take us out of high school. Where did music lead you after that?
Out of high school, I took a year off, and my band continued to play. So we started playing some club gigs. Our first gig was at this place called The Rat, which was like the punk bar. It's like the CBGBs of Boston.
Okay, that's awesome.
And it was a crazy experience. We go in there, and then we're in the dressing room, and then the guitar player from this band called the Nervous Eaters comes in, and he starts like chopping up cocaine on the heater back there. And he's like, man, you guys are great. I'm going to get you a record deal. I got to talk to you. And we're just like, oh, this guy's a freak.
And you're 18 at this time? Like 19,
yeah, I was
19?
18.
Wow.
Yeah. And then, so after that, I decided to go to college out in California.
Cool.
And went to UC Santa Cruz and hooked up with some musicians there. And while I was there, I took this amazing class called The History, Literature, and Technology of Electronic Music with this guy, Gordon Mumma, who was a pioneer in the electronic music world. And in fact, he would tell this story about, started out in Detroit, in Ann Arbor. And apparently he went to a bank the same week that Berry Gordy went to the same bank to go get his loan to start Motown. And he was starting the Electronic Music Tape Center for Ann Arbor.
Holy moly.
And so he spent a lot of time recording things along with his colleagues. And so part of the class was 5 hours a week in the library listening to his personal tapes. And to this day, I wish I had brought a tape recorder with me and just copied them all, because they were amazing.
And this is electronic music in the year 19...
This was 1980-81 when I was there.
What did that look and sound like?
Well, he had it was the history of electronic music. So he started out, the recordings we had started out with Musique Concrète, which
Not familiar.
I think started in France. And there was these two guys who worked for the French radio stations, Pierre Henry and Pierre, I've forgotten the second guy's name, but they started to view music as not limited by the sounds that you could use to create compositions. So they did very early sampling, and they would take these disc recorders that are like the size of a washing machine. This is in the 40s, and go out and record stuff, and then come back and mix it together in more or less kind of a classical tradition in terms of the form of the composition. And so they did some amazing stuff, and they'd have all these crazy random noises playing the parts of certain things, and
Is it like, was there a theme to it with nature, like natural sounds?
Some of them were more industrial. So, it was a precursor to all the sampling stuff that we get now.
I had no idea that was going on back in those days.
Who knew?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's why you take classes like that.
Oh man.
And then
to have bootlegged those tapes though.
Yeah. And when he started out, he studied with this guy, Usachevsky, who was one of the first people to do computer music. And so, you have to make these punch cards and feed them into a computer and wait for the thing to process. It's like a room full of tubes and, all that crazy stuff. And then, he got into the stuff that was happening in the 60s. and he did some collaborations with Merce Cunningham, the dance guy in New York,
Okay.
who
I'm not
also
familiar
did
with
stuff
that name either.
with John Cage.
Awesome.
And
I know
so,
John Cage.
yeah, John Cage is amazing. And so the piece that he did with them is he developed these motion sensors, and this was in the 60s, so it was, pretty crude stuff.
Okay.
And then these, it was high tech for the time,
I was gonna say.
with these transmitters that would transmit control voltages to these synthesizers.
Whoa.
And then
Theremin style in a way.
in a way, yeah, like your velocity and attitude and altitude and all that stuff would feed back into these synthesizers. And then he had like these recordings of the New York Biofeedback Quartet, where sure these guys with electrodes on their brains hooked up to synthesizers, just sitting there going, and all this music is coming out. Yeah,
I'd love
it's
to
crazy.
See a picture of that.
And then he had some early Pink Floyd on his listening list. And then he had, so do you know what binaural is? Binaural
Yes,
recording?
it
Yeah.
only happens in headphones, and you're separating. I understand.
Right, you
it
have
to
a
be
head. A head with microphones built in with the ears.
Oh, yeah.
So he did a lot of recording of his friends' compositions. And there was one called Rainforest, where this guy had this huge barn and invited all of his friends to bring stuff, and then ran transducers through them, and then put them in an 8-channel sound system. So basically, you had oscillators with different types of noise. So it could be sine waves or pink noise or square waves or whatever, and running them through like a foam beer cooler, or whatever people just happen to bring.
Yeah.
And then projected it throughout this whole barn. So he's got a recording of walking through the barn, and it sounds like a rainforest, like just this amazing sounds coming from all these different places, and
That is
full
so
surround
cool.
sound. Oh, it's great.
That's such a super different world. It sounds like, for just replicating everything truly, authentically. Hey, let's go to a barn and let's use an insane technique to make these sounds versus what we
And using
are
found
seeing
objects.
so much of now.
Using found objects brought by people who are not musicians. And
Cool. That's the experimental energy that seems to be missing sometimes from projects these days.
well, somehow this has been following me for my entire life. When the
love
weird music happens, I sort of end up in the middle of it.
I love that though.
Oh,
Holy moly.
it's great. And it's taught me how to approach music from a very different perspective, so that even when I go back and play tonal rock and roll, it's still this other thing for me. It's it's got a much larger abstract life to it,
Wow.
as long as everybody's paying attention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that helps.
And then so I was there for a year, and then played in this band that was sort of a rotating cast of characters, and we did all kinds of music. But I met this guy, Jim Lewin, who you may have heard of. He's a guitar player.
I
And
feel like I've seen that name, but I don't know.
well, he played, so it's great. We played together in 1980, 81. And then fast forward 30 years, and I'm playing in Great American Taxi, and our guitar player decides he's going to leave the band. And we're on tour in Santa Cruz, where Jim still lives. And during the sound check, I invite him down to come hang out and meet everybody. And he had been playing in Frank Wakefield's band, which Jerry produced. Oh God, what's the name of their record? He's like one of the original bluegrass guys.
Oh,
Pistol Packin' Mama, all that stuff. I
I'm
think that's the
surprised
one.
I don't know that name. I think it might be my East Coast bluegrass origins, because I don't
Right.
think I. But that's awesome.
So Jim ended up playing with Frank Wakefield for years,
Wow.
playing traditional bluegrass.
And you invite him down to sound check, and
Yeah, I mean, I
So
hadn't
you-
seen him in like 25 years. And so he and Vince Herman, like sit down with acoustic guitars while we're wiring up all the electrical stuff. And they just start playing bluegrass tunes. And I don't know how well you know Vince, but he knows like 1.5 million bluegrass tunes. He
That's
knows
awesome.
1 million songs anyway.
yeah.
And so they just completely hit it off. And then about a day later, we're traveling along a highway, and we're like, well, Jefferson's going to leave. How about Lewin? So Lewin and I got to play in a band 30 years later.
Wow.
It was great. And he's
What
a
a connection.
ferocious guitar player. He's
That's
just
awesome.
He's
I
amazing.
got to look him up and
You should.
become familiar.
You should. He's a Telecaster guy.
Oh,
And
sweet.
just-
I'm always envious of those Telecaster masters.
Oh yeah, he nails it. And he's great.
Awesome.
So
you're-
anyway, we had this great band, and you know, we'd play a lot of the school Friday afternoon keg party kinds of things.
Cool.
And that was also at the point where I sort of transitioned away from the whole Grateful Dead world.
Gotcha.
I actually that was when the Warfield shows were happening,
Okay.
and I declined a whole bunch of tickets, and then I also declined going up to Mickey Hart's barn for a weekend to go hang out, which I deeply regret. But
Was it just lack of interest in the scene, or what was there?
I don't know. I had started seeing them in '76, and you know, at that point, every time you went to a show, there was something different. There were new tunes. There was a different format. There was, you know, it just seemed like it was constantly evolving.
Yep.
And then by 1980, it sort of hit a format, and
Yeah.
I just started getting exposed to a lot of other different kinds of music.
Yep.
And so, you know, when I was out there, well, also when I was at UMass, so I saw some amazing concerts. I saw Miles Davis with his electric band. So this was the next year. And when I was in Santa Cruz, I got to go see the Dixie Dregs.
Cool.
And this was still when they were in their first, you know,
Iteration.
first iteration, and also still on the way up in terms of like their attitude and being psyched to be in the band. And seeing them live, like seeing Steve Morse live at that point was like, it was unreal. You know, he was just so, I mean, not only just competent, but lyrical and just really on top of it, present. The bass player was amazing.
That's
And
awesome.
then, you know, listening to Jerry, sort of feeling like, okay, well, this isn't even the Jerry that I saw 3 years ago.
Yeah.
You know? And
That's-
then,
those are fair reasons.
yeah.
That's-
And then, well, I saw all kinds of other incredible music that year. But I did actually go up to go see Grateful Dead acoustic at the Berkeley Little Theater. It was the
cool.
first SIVA benefit. And
Was it
so,
all acoustic, like all band members, or was it a?
so it was everybody but Phil. John Kahn was playing upright.
Okay. Cool.
And so then after they did their section, they also had a brief Rhythm Devils section, which was really cool because it was right at kind of the beginning of when they were bringing in the exotic percussion. So they did a Birnbaum duet, and
They're just figuring out what toys they really, really like.
yeah. And, you know, one of the things that I noticed, you know, Mickey is a very adventurous guy. He comes up with all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And every time they'd come around, he'd have some new toy to play on. And then the next time they came around, Bill would master it. And Mickey was on to the next thing.
That's funny.
I know, it was really funny.
I mean, I wonder if that's kind of one of the things that has helped the dynamic over the years. Like, stay fresh. Mickey's finding something new all the time,
And then Billy kills it.
and just, hey, I can play this too.
Yeah. I mean, I remember being at the 5777 show.
Wow.
And they had a brief drum section. I was watching them. I was like, wait a minute. Billy's the one who swings. That's where the swing is coming from. And, you know, I missed the single drummer shows by about
Those are pretty
2 years. But
So you said you missed him. You
I
didn't
missed
get
him.
to.
I didn't get to see him. Yeah.
What's it like to listen back to tapes from? Are you a fan of the single drum? Like,
Well,
Would
given
you-
that my introduction was Europe 72,
yeah, makes
but
sense.
I also love the double drum 60s stuff.
Yeah,
You know, it seemed like that was a lot more fluid.
I haven't really. I don't think I've ever gone that far as to think about what era of the drummers is my favorite. But I'm sure. I'm
Well,
sure there's
you know-
plenty of time to figure it out.
Yeah, there is, and there's something to be said for all of it.
Yeah.
You know,
Truly.
It's really
No matter what era is your favorite, no matter if you have a strong preference for certain members or strong, I don't know what the opposite of a strong preference is,
right.
but strong dislike or distaste or whatever, there's always something to be appreciated in every era. Whether if you don't like Jerry's tone in the 90s because the JBLs aren't there, there's still some beauty in it. And I'm still finding that out with all kinds of shows. That low fidelity, if that's the word you want to use, high noise floors on recordings kind of bug me. So I have not listened to as much of the early stuff as I really would like to.
Back in the 70s, if we could get a cassette of anything, it was just like, oh yeah,
music. This is
deal.
Liquid Gold.
Yeah. When I was
that's awesome.
17, I had to go get my wisdom teeth out at the hospital, and they decided to put me in. I don't know what they were thinking. They did all four at once, and they put me under, so I had to be in the hospital for a day. And so they ran out of room in the regular ward where they would put 16 or 17-year-old kids, and I ended up in the thoracic surgery ward. And my roommate was this guy in his 70s who had just undergone a heart-lung transplant and was barely hanging on. And I'm there with my little, remember those cassette players that were just they were more for recording voices and stuff like that. With the buttons
I'm picturing
on the
like
side.
a Sony D6 or.
Not even. No.
Not even. Okay.
This is like Radio Shack material.
Okay.
Just really terrible. And I had this recording of one of the Winterland shows with the Dark Star into Morning Dew, and it was, full of hiss and, I don't know how many generations, but it was like my lifeline. And I was playing it on the tape recorder through the speaker, and the nurses come running in and say, "Will you turn that down?" So I had to use this little earphone that was, designed for a dictaphone or something.
Maybe they shouldn't have put the 16-year-old in the thoracic surgery.
Yeah, right.
That's all I'm saying.
You do what you have to do.
That's awesome. So, I know you to be really knowledgeable about audio engineering world, and there's so much.
That's coming in the next.
That's
step.
coming up. Okay, awesome, cool. I didn't want to get off track.
We have a
but the tapes
for
reminded me.
Yeah. After my first year at UC Santa Cruz, I decided to go back to the East Coast. I had a girlfriend who was back there, so I joined her at UMass Amherst. Cool. And I started taking a jazz theory class there and some jazz ensembles. So that was the first time that I'd really done that. And so they were like, "All right, here, transcribe this Clifford Brown solo." I was like, "Whoa, this is intense." So I had to learn that. Yeah, it was huge. Wow. And it's when I really tried to, I'm going to read music on the bass guitar. And all these amazing shows came in. So there was Dizzy Gillespie with Max Roach, Illinois Jacquet, Leon Thomas, and, the original guys of bebop.
That's insane.
It was insane. It was incredible. And
you're going to all these shows?
Going to all these shows. And Max Roach was a visiting professor there. So he also came and did clinics with our class. Awesome. And so, we got to hang out with him and his band.
And what was your major at this point? Did you have one?
I didn't really have a major.
Okay.
I was studying a whole bunch of different stuff.
Just taking classes.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
awesome. Then I also saw King Crimson. So this was right after Discipline came out.
Wow.
And it was utterly amazing. I snuck into the theater during sound check, and I got to watch Adrian Belew set up his rig. And one of the coolest things was, he has all these feedback noises. Yep. And what he does is he goes into the venue, figures out where the resonances are on the stage, and then marks them out with tape. So he was doing all this different stuff and putting pieces of tape down. And
I think I heard the same early on in my life somewhere. Somebody said the same thing about Santana. I wonder if.
I bet he did.
I wouldn't be surprised, but that must be a common sort of. Or he must have been the first doing it, right? In King Crimson.
Well, yeah. I mean, his whole guitar noise thing was so crazy.
It's something else. I love how excited you get about these, music genres that you can't show your average American and expect them to like really be into it. But when you can appreciate that beauty, that's so rewarding and so
Oh,
cool.
it's the best. And then Miles Davis came through, and that's when he had Marcus Miller and Mike Stern and that first comeback band that he had, which was Al Foster on the drums. I mean, it's just amazing. And so about 3 or 4 weeks before that, I decided I wanted to study electric bass, but nobody in the bass department would teach me electric bass. They were like, "Yeah, you can play upright." And then they offered me a scholarship to be an oboe player because I guess they were hurting for oboe players. And I was like, "No, I'm not going to do that. I know what I want to do." So
Yeah.
I drove back to Boston and went to Berkeley to the bass department and said, "All right, I need somebody to teach me private lessons." And this guy, Bruce Gertz, said, "Okay, yeah, sure. Here's my address and come by, in a couple of weeks on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. and,
Wow.
we'll get started." So I ended up driving through a raging snowstorm, which should have been, 90 minutes, took me like 4 hours.
Oh my God.
And get there. And then the next morning, go down to his apartment, knock on the door, and he's all bleary eyed and just, looking
Had a
like
night out.
he had a night out. He said to me, "I had a gig with Stern last night and I still haven't gone to sleep. So, well, you drove all this way, so come on in."
Oh man.
And so out of a back room comes this, and I have no idea who Stern is. It's like, yeah, okay, well, you look like
Sure,
you're in rough
yeah.
shape. Must have been fun. And so this like sort of pudgy, greasy haired guy comes out of this back room and stumbles down the hallway and like leans his hand on my chest and says, "You got anything to get high on?" And like tumbles into the kitchen,
Holy shit.
wipes out on the floor. And a week later, I'm at the Fine Arts Center at UMass seeing him on stage with Miles.
Whoa.
And it was just like, it was like looking at somebody
That's
whose
so weird.
eyes were looking into the center of the universe. It was like, it was the closest that I've ever felt that I've ever been to seeing Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the intensity, the breadth of expression, the way the guitar just becomes this, I don't know, an environment of sound. And
That's a beautiful description.
oh, it was amazing.
Sound. I love the way you're describing all these shows. They make me feel like as if a little part of me could sort of attend. That's
Well, there are
awesome.
tapes of lots of them.
Phew, I gotta listen. Yeah, we need to make an Edwin Hurwitz playlist
Right.
of all your favorite shows. I'd love to publish that.
So later that spring, and I was getting more into the idea of studying electric bass. Later that spring, I went to go see Gil Scott-Heron at a local club. And that's when he came out with, what was the record called? Reflections. And there's an 18-minute cut on it called B-Movie. And it starts out with this bass line, and this, totally groovy bass line, slap bass. And he comes out and he goes, "Well, the first thing I want to say is mandate my ass, as if 26% of the registered voters constitute a mandate." And he goes on this diatribe about Ronald Reagan, about, all the people who are in Reagan's cabinet, the history of
Whoa.
where they come from, what their
B-movie?
B-movie, all their philosophies and where they've been. And those guys ended up being in the government all the way through the W era, doing all the same kinds of things. And so that was the moment where I was like, yeah, that's what I want to do. This is it. And so
That is awesome.
oh, it was an amazing show.
Wow.
And so at that point, I applied to Berkeley and transferred and went there. And, my playing was, I could get around on the instrument, but I still had no idea what I was doing. And I started in the summer, and the first thing they do is give you an audition to rate you.
yeah.
And the rating system is different now, but then if you got below fives, you had to take workshops. And then if you got fives, you could go into ensembles.
Okay.
And for some reason, they gave me fives, which was completely inappropriate. But I think that they needed bass players for the
they needed
ensembles.
people in ensemble.
And I thought, I bet they thought I wasn't going to last the summer. So
Wow.
I ended up, going through, and my ratings increased a little bit, but I ended up playing in some of these ensembles with people who were way over my head. And, a lot of times I was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. Why do these guys have to put up with me? This is terrible.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I played with incredible people.
Oh my God. What an
And,
opportunity.
Yeah, like the drummer for Living Colour, Will Calhoun.
God.
And when I first played with him, he just like grabbed me out of the hallway and, grabbed my collar. It's like, you're a bass player, come with me. And I find myself in this room with like, funk band, full gospel choir, sight reading
my
music
God.
on the fretless I bought the week before. It was just like, I know, it's so
This
embarrassing.
could be a sitcom.
Yeah, I guess so. And I was also drafted into the very first funk ensemble that they had. But it
Wow.
wasn't so much James Brown and P-Funk and that kind of stuff. But it was Tower of Power, Al Jarreau,
Okay.
So pretty produced Quincy Jones style stuff.
Yeah.
But like those Tower of Power charts are just like a stream of 16th notes with very carefully placed rests. And, I'm trying to sight read this stuff. And the drummer was from the Bay Area and grew up with all those guys. So he's playing my part as a side stick on the snare while playing his parts, leading me through the charts.
Oh my God.
It was crazy. But, what a great way to learn.
That's awesome. And so you're learning like tight, muted.
Oh,
like,
yeah, all that
fast
stuff.
funk like doom.
Oh, yeah.
That's crazy.
All that crazy stuff. And, after seeing Robert Gordon with Gil Scott-Heron, I was getting all about the thumb stuff.
That's awesome.
And then I was also in one of the first Afro-pop ensembles.
Cool.
But at the same time, there were things that I got involved with that were far more experimental. So every year, two of the professors would get together and get a parade license from the city of Boston and the city of Cambridge.
Cool.
And have a parade that would go down the streets, stop traffic with all these Berkeley students.
Actual
and
musicians.
Actual musicians. And they'd have two charts. One would be like, the fake John Philip Sousa chart. And the other one would be sort of like the second line New Orleans thing. And it was great. Like people dressed up in all these crazy costumes and,
Wow.
had all this fun. And then, I got to meet all these people who were doing really sort of off the books, interesting stuff. And then finally in 1984, the year of George Orwell,
Yep.
a friend of mine got an ensemble slot assigned to him. So we decided that what we would do for it is just rehearse 3 to 6 hours a day, improvisation, and put something together that, would be completely of the language that we had created in the improvisation we were doing.
So cool.
So, and then we also wrote a few tunes, and then we covered Falling Grace by Steve Swallow,
Okay.
which I don't know if you know that.
I'm not
tune.
familiar, unfortunately.
You should look it up. It's like
Okay.
musical Escher, the way that
Awesome.
it is awesome.
I'm
It's-
gonna
it's
gonna
in the
make
real
a list
book.
after this whole thing. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But it's a great tune. And then as time went on and we rehearsed, we started incorporating other things into whatever it was that we had. And we kind of went in two different directions at once. So we knew these two women who did political street theater, and they did pieces based on food shortage, inequality, nuclear war,
Yeah.
different kinds of pollution, very in your face kinds of things.
Topics.
So we used whatever it was that they had come up with as a score. And so we rehearsed with them to go through their stuff. And so, when the explosions happen, we have to, bring out the big booms and
To illustrate that somehow.
yeah, exactly.
musically.
And so we'd been doing things previous to this that, we'd draw pictures or just have colors as a score and, follow that kind of stuff.
That's really
And
cool.
the second part, we put together a slideshow of various slides. So when I had driven back from California with my dad, I took all these pictures of the Grand Canyon and things like that. So that was part of it. And then there were industrial parts. And then two of the people wrote poetry to it.
Wow.
And so the first half of the recital was more or less standard tunes, and then the second half was a much bigger ensemble. First I think it was a quintet, like a couple of horn players and guitar, keyboards, bass, drums, that kind of thing. Cool. And then we had about, I think it was 11 or 12 people on stage, and including two guys who'd been kicked out of Berkeley for various infractions, playing guitar through these little PV amps, doing only feedback. And it was so quiet you could like play recorder over it. And we had recorders and percussion and, this huge arsenal of instruments. And so the first part were the political street theater stuff. And then that jammed into a percussion jam where we passed out instruments to the audience. And this isn't just any audience. This is, and so my grandfather came to see this. And so he's out there with a cowbell, and it was just amazing. And then
what a cool moment.
I know, right? And then so we bring all the instruments back on stage and then do the whole thing with the slideshow.
Wow.
And we had professors there who were totally into it. And, it was kind of a throwback to a lot of the experimental 60s stuff that had happened.
Yeah.
But the administration came in and turned on the lights before we were done. And then the week later, they issued rules about what you could and could not do at a Berkeley recital. And so this is leap year day.
Yeah, I love that.
The leap year day of the year of George Orwell. So it's like this incredibly auspicious day.
Oh, did that? Do you feel? I guess looking back on it, I would hope you feel more pride than sadness that you.
Oh God, we were proud.
Oh yeah, you're happy as hell.
We were proud going in. I mean, we knew it was going to be awesome.
Oh, that's
and
great.
so they made all these different rules, and everybody in the ensemble had to be from Berkeley, and
can't bring back
at the time.
band students.
And if there was going to be more than a quartet, you had to list what it was going to be and give them a copy of the program before the, all this sort of.
Who knew a school could be such
fascist
a bureaucracy?
Stuff. Yeah, exactly. But we got back at them because our keyboard player was doing work study at the Berkeley Performance Center, which is like the big room there. Mm-hmm. And he was really good friends with Brad Berger. To bring in the Grateful Dead thing, Brad Berger started learning his chops in the early 70s in the Grateful Dead crew. So he was part of the Wall of Sound crew.
That's where I've heard the name, I think.
I mean, he was not one of the famous crew guys. He just was one of the people they brought on because they needed a lot more people. And then later on, he brought the first rock bands to the Soviet Union and, did all this stuff.
Really?
So my friend Mike, who sadly passed away a while ago, and he would hang out and like smoke joints in the projection room while they were doing the concerts there and stuff.
That's crazy.
And so Brad was like, when Mike had his senior recital, Brad was like, go nuts, do whatever you want to do. And so what Mike did, he was one of the big experimental instigators. And
he's one of the people they made the rules about.
Yeah, exactly. And so when I lent him my real book, he was working on My Favorite Things.
Yeah.
And so when I got it back, like every bar was in a different meter, and there were all these chord substitutions. And, it's great. He was working, after he finished at Berkeley, he went to the conservatory and started writing microtonal symphonies. But anyway, so his recital had all this crazy
listen to one
stuff.
Of those.
Oh yeah, it's nuts. And he would like sing microtonal solfege to me, So when you're singing do re mi, there's all
How
these
do you split
intervals.
that up to microtones?
So it's like do, de, da. I don't know what the syllables are, but there's all these other syllables.
Oh my god.
So he had written all these compositions, and he did one for electronic tape where he had just put all these tape things together with two tape decks. So constantly through, sound collages and different noises with music and whatever, he needed to have happen. And so throughout all of it, though, you'd hear whoop, whoop, as he would rewind the tape. And
so he's like, he has to operate it as he's
so
going through the performance.
low tech.
Wow.
And then he wrote,
That's so cool.
He wrote this poetry and had people standing in a circle around the audience. And people would get a fraction of the words, so the words would be like spinning around everybody. And then he wrote this other piece that was sort of more traditional jazz, except that he had somebody in the balcony playing a squeaky mop bucket, and there was somebody in the dressing room playing trombone, so they had to have two conductors to conduct down the stairs to let the trombone player know where everybody was.
It's crazy.
And then the big pièce de résistance was T.S. Eliot's The Hollow Men, done with this guy performing it somewhere in between Jim Morrison and David Byrne, with bread and puppets as like the Greek choir behind them, and then the rest of us were playing like this crazy space funk music behind all of it. It was brilliant. It was
That's
so
awesome.
brilliant. Yeah.
What was the audience like at that?
You know, it was a typical audience for somebody's senior recital, but you know, people were way into
jaws
it.
dropped, or was it all?
Oh yeah. I mean,
people
I think
appreciating it too.
yeah, my parents came and they thought it was awesome.
Cool. That's awesome.
Oh, they might have been like, okay, what are we sending our kid to the school for?
That's
So, after that, you know, shortly after all right, to back up just a little bit, I started doing music production and engineering. So that was my major there.
Okay.
And when I started, it was still 8-track studios and very primitive stuff. And, you know, students would have the keys. We'd go in late night and mess around and do all kinds of stuff.
That's how you learn.
And then they revamped everything, brought in, you know, all these Studer 24 tracks and much bigger boards and lexicon stuff and really nice mics. And,
Cool.
you know, they upgraded the whole thing. So I'd say the biggest single thing that I learned was how to read a mixer flowchart. So, you know, I think they were Sound Workshop mixers. But
Not even familiar with that brand.
well,
Are they out
old
of business,
school.
or?
Yeah, probably. You know, and they weren't amazing mixers, but they were definitely professional in terms of their layout. And they were what's called an inline mixer. So you've got all these mixers coming, or all these channels coming in, and normally you'd think, okay, so when I'm overdubbing, am I going to have all my stuff returning from tape onto separate channels, which is what they initially did. So you'd have, like, you know, your 16 or 24 input channels, and then you'd have 16 or 24 return channels.
Okay.
Receive
Gotcha.
channels. But these were inline mixers, so that meant that you could flip part of it to be the return, assign half the EQ to it, and keep it in a much more compact space. And then when you're mixing, assign all the inputs to the regular channels, and then bring in further stuff through the other channels, the temporary receive channels that you were using while you were overdubbing.
What's that?
So
Bring your total count up to then, your effective count.
I forget. It was something like 40.
48-ish?
Yeah, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea that's how it worked. That's really
Well, I had no idea either. And in the first semester, you have to learn these flow charts. And so the teacher for the exam says, all right, we're doing this process. Show me the diagram flow of the input from the mic to the tape recorder all the way back, and where it goes to the outputs to the effects and the monitors. And so you get real with that stuff.
Yeah.
It's like
amazing with signal flow in no time, I'd imagine.
Yeah. Well, it took me a while, but, you know.
A little bit of practice.
Yeah. But it
Cool.
was really important. I mean, it's like learning the music theory of sound production.
Yeah.
So once you get thinking like that, then dealing with effects, mixers, all of that kind of thing becomes a lot easier, because you have in your brain like what's actually going on inside the box.
Yeah.
And then once you start dealing with digital stuff, which is so flexible, I think a lot of people see that stuff and they get overwhelmed. And the reason they get overwhelmed is that they don't go into it thinking, I need this. How can I accomplish this? They come into it looking at this box and going, what does this box do? I don't get it.
Gotcha.
So, you know, it kind of turns things around.
So you're kind of around in that early obviously everything's still analog at that point.
Yep. Editing with a razor blade.
Oh my God. You splice tape.
I splice
That
tape
is something I've never done.
all
ever.
the time. And so after I graduated, I ended up getting a job at a small recording studio in Boston,
Cool.
and which I was a little bit cavalier about it. You know, I brought in my mix reel from Berkeley and talked to the owner of the studio. And it wasn't until I'd been there for a couple of years that I found out he'd interviewed like 40 people. And then, despite my not so crazy drug history, he told me once, I just assumed that you did more acid than Carter has little pills. So I don't know what he saw in me, but he came from the audio for video world. So he was a boom operator in a lot of video shoots. And the studio started out as kind of a rock and roll studio. He had a partner who was in one of the local bands that, you know, had some regional success. And, you know, so the guitar player wanted to be in the studio, and he did a lot of session work there. And so I did a lot of local bands. And then they started branching off into doing audio for video.
Cool.
So
ADR and stuff, or
no, it was mostly doing sound effects after the fact. So we had this huge wall of reels of sound effects with center track time code on it. Whoa. And then the whole library on cassettes, so you could match up, you know, you could find it without having to put the reels on the decks. So one person would be watching the videos and then deciding what in the library would be appropriate for each spot, and then taking notes. And then we would have to drag down those reels, and we had these synchronizers that would synchronize our 3/4 inch video deck with the 16-track tape recorder, and then the 1/4 inch tape recorder that had the sound effects in it. And then, you know, you'd have to hit go and hope that they all, you know, sync up at the right time.
It's amazing art got made.
I know, right? You're fighting with these machines. And
that's unreal.
It was crazy. And,
what?
You know, I worked on this show called Making Sense of the 60s, which was about the civil rights movement. Or, no, cool. Eyes on the Prize.
Okay.
And, you know, so one of the amazing things that I got out of that was actually I had to go through all the archival footage and just, you know, me and a tape deck, video tape deck, and look at the stuff and listen to it and figure out if there was noise reduction on it, and if so, what kind. So they didn't have to do it on the online suite at, you know, $100 and some an hour. Instead, they pay me $10 an hour to sit there and just
judge tracks and say, has this already had Dolby noise? Was Dolby the first to do the?
There was DBX, there was Dolby, there was, you know, all kinds of stuff.
Pre-isotope.
Oh God, yeah. Oh yeah. And but the cool thing is that I was watching all this archival footage of all these historical people from the civil rights movement. Wow. And a lot of it didn't make it to the final cut. So I just, you know, there was interviews with Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, all these amazing guys that, you know, I'd been turned on to listening to Gil Scott-Heron. And, you know, I don't know how much you know about him, but
almost none.
So is probably the first things that he got famous for were Whitey's on the Moon and The Revolution Will Not Be Televised.
Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Sweet.
So, you know, he's a fascinating character that we could talk about for a long time.
That's so cool.
But, you know, he was a poet and a musician, but primarily, you know, words were his thing. And he was also extremely politically woke, you know, from the black perspective. And he's often considered like the grandfather of rap.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
I need to tune in more and learn about him. That's awesome.
And so while all this was happening, I was also experiencing, so, you know, in the 70s, my heroes had been Jerry, Jaco Pastorius. I got to see Weather Report with Jaco. I saw Joni Mitchell with Jaco and Pat Metheny. And I saw, and Gil too, like they all became junkies in the 80s. And, you know, I just saw the fire that they had just, die out and fizzle to various degrees. And, you know, luckily Jerry had this whole system propping him up thanks to lots of cash. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things that surprises me about him is that he's got this constitution that can withstand so much abuse. if anybody else did what he did, they would have been dead by the time they were 40.
That's a really wow. What an interesting way of saying it. But wow,
Yeah, he had this
that's heavy.
life spark within him that was just huge. And, I felt I got to see a little bit of it when it was unfettered by the opiates.
Yeah.
And, 76, 77.
And you stopped going, not stopped going completely, but 78 you said was kind of when the Warfield shows.
I started getting sort of sidetracked by, all the funk stuff by Bootsy Collins, Fela Kuti from Nigeria. Do you know about him?
Say it one more time.
Fela Kuti.
I don't think I know that name.
He is a trip. So
cool.
He grew up in Nigeria in an upper middle class family and was basically, sent to college in England and expected to toe the line and, become a doctor or something. Yeah, exactly. And he was more or less a playboy. And this is in the 60s. And then he somehow ended up getting politically woken up to what was going on in Nigeria, all the corruption. And I think that being in England gave him access to seeing what the corporations were that were really taking advantage of the countries in Africa. And then he also got turned on to James Brown and started looking into the traditional music of Africa. So he brought together like the James Brown stuff and traditional awesome. African music, and he started this whole thing called Afrobeat. And he had a huge band with all these horn sections and tons of drummers and singers. And he ended up, as time went on, he gathered all these people around him, and he was super radical, singing like these 20-minute diatribes against AT&T and all these corporations that were raping Africa for all the materials, and it was heavy stuff. And then he'd get in fights with the government, and he ended up putting together a compound there with him and his 20 or 30 wives, and a lot of whom were his backup singers. And it's just like this music that it's an environment unto itself.
Cool.
And I got to see him. So he was arrested and a bunch of people killed. His mom was thrown out of a second-story window when the Nigerian government raided the compound, and they put him in prison.
All government
broke his hands.
Stuff.
Yeah. And so after he got out, he came to the U.S. I think in 1986, and I went to go see him, and it was It was amazing.
That's a story I've never heard before.
But I started listening to him in 1980.
Oh my
god.
And
on vinyl, all these crazy records. And
how cool was he imprisoned at that point, or what?
He got imprisoned probably a little bit after that.
Okay.
So.
Wow.
And then a friend of mine who I went to Berkeley with was invited to go over there and play guitar with him.
Oh my god.
He was like, "No, I'm not a guitar player. I'm a sax player." So he was like playing.
Okay.
But now he's a professor at Yale and is one of the foremost authorities on Fela, and has an Afrobeat band that he performs with in New York, and he's now a bass player. So, yeah, Michael Veal, man, I learned so much from him when I was at Berkeley. He's awesome.
That's awesome. So that was a fellow classmate of yours?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And so. He was in that band that we did the big recital at the performance hall.
Okay, cool.
He's the funky guitar player.
He knows what's going on.
Oh, he totally knows what's going on. And so anyway, I was working at the studio and trying to play in bands and not really having a whole lot of luck. But I had this vision of what I wanted to do, and I wanted to be funky like Gil Scott-Heron stuff, and I wanted it to be something where there was consciousness to it and that kind of thing. And I was playing with some blues bands and different things, but nothing was. And I was also, the other big thing that happened was that when I graduated from Berkeley, I still felt like I didn't know how to play. I'd gone through the whole course there, teachers, everything, ensembles, and it just still felt mysterious to me. So, and I'd been getting A's in all my classes, so I
Yeah.
I mentally understood what was going on with theory and all of
Imposter
that.
syndrome almost, though.
Oh,
some
absolutely.
kind? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that still
Yeah.
is part of my life because I don't even really feel like a bass player now because I lost all my chops 10 years ago.
Oh, man.
But
I bet you still got them.
so I started studying with this guy who was a guitar player who'd studied with Charlie Banacus, who was like the big jazz guy in the 70s and 80s in Boston.
Cool.
And, all the heavy Stern studied with him intensively, and Schofield and all these horn players. And he would give people like a 20-minute lesson that would be, they go home and work
The
for
next
10
6
hours.
years of their life.
Well, they'd have to have it done by the next week.
Yeah.
And so he studied with him for a while, and then with Mick Goodrick, who is an amazing jazz player. And so he had kind of synthesized the two techniques of organizing, especially organizing theory on the guitar or the bass. And I learned more in the first 8 weeks with him than I learned in 8 semesters at Berklee.
That's cool.
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, all of a sudden, all this stuff made sense. And
Wow.
the amazing thing about it was that none of the steps that you take to get through the material are that complicated. Each one is really simple, but it just builds on itself, and you learn all the chords and all. And well, here's the other thing that sort of comes up when I have to talk about music theory. People talk about scales. People
Yes.
talk about modes.
Yep.
And I think in a lot of ways, scales and modes are useless
Okay.
because they're
Elaborate.
static.
Okay.
So if you hear somebody playing in a scale, and they're just playing the scale up and down, you don't really know where they're going because one note becomes much the same as another note, and
Yes.
it's not doing anything.
Yeah.
Whereas chords always have a harmonic context.
Cool.
So
That makes sense.
every note has a chordal context. So, and all you have to do is change your thinking. You don't even really have to change what you're playing as much, but change your thinking about each note that you play and think about its chordal context. And all of a sudden, you can hop over into this world where everything has context about harmonic context. And, Mickey Hart said this thing when they were doing the Rhythm Devils, which he said everything in the jungle is either towards food or away from danger. And you can think about the same thing in terms of harmony. So, I mean, Western harmony is very hierarchical. You've got the tonic,
Yep.
and then you've got the dominant and the subdominant,
Yep.
and they all lead to each other in very specific ways. And if you start applying that towards food and away from danger concept
That's
to
weird.
it, well, yeah, I mean,
It's beautiful. No, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I'm just like, that's really cool to think about.
yeah.
Continue.
And it's so if you put that kind of thing in your brain while you're playing music, instead of going, okay, I've got to play this scale and then I play, this chord and all that stuff. If you just get yourself together with the instrument enough so that doesn't become a chore and doesn't become distracting, then you can start living in this realm where music is an environment and you're doing the things that you need to do in the environment.
Wow, because it's just instinctual survival mechanism.
And sometimes it's dancing, sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's, it's everything that you experience in your life.
That's
and
awesome.
so, when I teach privately, sometimes I just have my students come in and say, okay, play to me what happened to you on the way here today. And you can use this mode. And, but what they have to do is within that mode, understand what each note is in terms of the chords that it could be and what those chords would be in terms of the towards food and away from danger thing.
That's a beautiful. I would love to highlight the last 2 minutes and put that up on its own. That's really well said, and a lot to think about for me. And I'm still trying to take it all in, but I like that.
Well, yeah.
God.
I guess when you've had as much exposure as I have had to the fringe parts of music.
Oh God, I can only imagine if I had been listening for. You've had years and years of listening to the fringes, as you put it. That's so cool though, to just be able to turn your instrument into your environment. I'm still tripping out over that. That's awesome.
So this is like the mid '80s,
Cool.
and I'm in my mid 20s and driving a cab in Boston, and having experiences like picking up Chick Corea and his manager from the channel and driving them back into the hotel while they're in the back seat arguing about firing one of the musicians the next morning, and
They have no idea.
They have no idea.
that you're listening intently.
I'm listening, and they don't even know that I know who they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then another time I picked up Alan Holdsworth and his whole band. So this is a crazy story. So this was 87, I think. And I'm downtown near the kind of tourist district of Boston. And it's a Tuesday night, maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. And they all get into my car. And Chad Wackerman's up in the front seat. And they're like, so where do you go? Where Boston's shut down. Where's it all happening? And I'm like, well, I'm not going to take them to the combat zone where all the, the strippers and hookers are.
This is happening, yeah.
So I decided to take them to Harvard Square, where, there's a couple of bars that are open really late night. And I know that Alan is into beer. Okay. So they're the Worst House there, which is open late. And it's no longer there, but has a million different kinds of beer, which for 1987 is pretty rare.
That was amazing. I
bet. So the craft beer thing hadn't taken off yet.
Yep.
So, I dropped them off, and I'm like, wow, I had Alan Holdsworth. This is amazing. So flash forward, I don't know how many, 15 years or so, I'm in Boulder hanging out with a friend of mine who's an amazing guitar player, this guy Bill Copper. And he's like, we're talking about our Boston days because he was at Berkeley. And I was like, yeah, I was driving a cab and, it was okay. I could make my own hours and everything. But there was this time that I picked up Alan Holdsworth and brought him to Harvard Square. And he looks at me and he goes, oh, my God. That was like my second night as a waiter at the Worst House, and they came in and went to my table, and I screwed up their orders left and right and got fired the next day.
There's a Goosebumps moment for me.
I know, right?
That's crazy.
I mean, my life is so full of these insane...
Back to the book with the picture in your music camp. And
I mean, it's like that all over.
That is so fucking awesome.
So
I love hearing this.
Eventually, there was this guy who was the roommate of a friend of mine who is this amazing bass player. And he said, I was talking to him, and he said, oh, yeah, this friend of mine wants to start a blues band. Are you interested in doing it? And I was thinking, oh, my God, Skip is going to hand me off a gig? This is incredible. I better, shed for this thing for like a month before I even call him up.
Yeah.
And, I finally call him up, and it's like this German guy, Fabian, who wants to play American blues and have this authentic experience. And I quickly learned that's okay, I understand why Skip doesn't want to do the gig.
I see
what's going on. So I invited my friend Jonathan, who is a drummer that I'd worked with at Berkeley. He was part of all the crazy, insane stuff that we did together.
Nice.
And so we decided to play with Fabian, and he had a singer with him who had this amazing, commanding voice, really could do the blues really well. And so we started playing some local blues clubs, and I was not that happy with it, and Jonathan wasn't that happy with it because it was very stiff.
Gotcha.
Fabian really wanted to play off the record, and I was young and wanted to do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So I invited this other friend of mine, Felix, to join up as a second guitar player. He and I had played together at Berkeley, and he was also up for anything. I mean, we'd spend times with effects things, just making crazy noises together, and
that's awesome.
And all of that. So we started playing, and finally Fabian was like, all right, this is too much for me. So he dropped out.
Now you got a blues band.
No, well, it didn't have to be a blues band.
Yeah, true.
And so then we decided to try some other stuff, and we were writing music and covering some more interesting things, and we needed a keyboard player, and so we auditioned all these keyboard players, and they most of them were really kind of straight ahead rock and roll, and a lot of them were really good, but they didn't really have much sense of adventure. And so my housemate's brother at that time was a piano player, and I'd never met him, and he was doing gigs down in the financial district in the piano bars. So we decided to go down there and check him out. And there's all these guys in their suits, and we've got hair down to here and scruffy jeans.
You guys did.
And we go in and introduce ourselves, and then I'm like, "Can you play Falling Grace?" That same tune.
Yeah. Yep.
And he's like, "I don't know, never played it. I'll look it up." And he made a really valiant effort. And then we were like, and in front of like this very conservative situation.
That's
and so
incredible.
we asked him, "Do you want to come down and audition for our band?"
Yeah.
And he came in, and he was just like, his leg was like going like this with the beat, and just totally into it.
You already knew. You found
So we found the guy.
That's sweet.
And so, it was guitar, bass, drums, saxophone. And, we started playing mostly parties and things like that. And
Cool.
we had a bunch of jazz fusion stuff that we were writing and trying to keep it all original for the most part. And so we started playing around New England a bunch. We played some festivals and stuff. Like we had this crazy thing that was a mass cannabis thing that was out in the middle of nowhere.
Wow.
And, yeah, I mean, this was
Back in the day.
1989, so it was pretty ahead of its time. So it was
Seriously.
a legalization for hemp. And yeah, it was fun. But right across the street was a Boy Scout jamboree with all these high school kids. And so the cops come over to us and they're like, "All right, we know what's going on here, but just try to keep it away from the other kids, will you?" And so we played a lot of really strange gigs. And in those days, the South End of Boston was a really happening loft scene.
Okay.
And so we started playing, these loft parties down there and meeting all these other bands and becoming friends with these other bands. And this was also at the time when Fish was beginning to make inroads. So
Up in Burlington, right?
Up in Burlington. Cool. And they, their first gig, they played at this place called Molly's, which was like a sports bar.
Yep.
And when they played there, they met this guy, Ben Hunter, and his roommate, John Paluska, who were business students at Boston University. Mm-hmm. And Paluska was looking for a senior project, and he's like, "How about I manage you guys?" And
It's perfect.
it turned out, so, there's all kinds of things where, all these paths interweave. So at that time, we had a character who was living up in the attic of our band house, and I won't go too far into what he was involved with, but he ended up doing merch for Fish on one of their tours. So he ended up introducing us. And there was also one of John Paluska's roommates was somebody that I knew from the scene. He was going to the art school. And so it was like this big scene where everybody kind of knew everybody. And in fact, I met my wife at the senior art show for the art school when my brother was a senior there. And I was talking to this other guy, and so we were talking about this and that, and he knew people in the music scene, and he was still going to the art school then. And then so Don walked up from the other direction and started talking to him, and he like placed himself between us and wouldn't introduce us, and it was like this crazy scene, but she totally stuck in my mind. And then that was in the spring of 1990. And then that fall, we were playing a gig at the Paradise, and we got introduced by the guy who lived up in the attic. And
another moment.
Another
just like
moment.
That book.
And
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I mean, the moments that we have in our life together are just, it's countless moments like that.
That's
it's
so
crazy.
Cool. That makes me happy.
Yeah, here we are 30 years later, it's a beautiful thing. But anyway, so where was I?
Okay.
So anyway,
so yeah,
we had this other blues band. we kept being in the situation where somebody would have gigs, they would hire us as a band, we would become their band, and then we would fire them. Because it just was like, all right, we love playing together, but you're just not up to what we're doing. You don't understand it.
Sorry, you just don't have the creative direction.
Well, you're not practicing enough. You're not, And so we would practice all the time. We pretty much treated it like our day job.
Nice.
And we started playing around, I guess we'd play New Hampshire, Vermont, Western Mass, places like that.
Cool.
And as a band, we were probably making $30,000, $40,000 a year. I mean, it was something. I mean, it felt like a big step at that time. And then our drummer quit. And so we were trying to figure out what to do. And we auditioned dozens of drummers. And then finally this guy came in, this guy Dave Watts, who now runs the Motet. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're gaining a lot of...
Yes, I have.
Amazing drummer.
I think they covered... My exposure to them was they're covering one of the Zeppelin albums or a portion of it or something. Yeah. And just my mind was blown. Yeah. Completely blown.
Yeah, Dave is amazing. But when he joined up, he was a glam rocker. So he was, he had pictures from his old band with makeup and the big hair and, the whole thing. He didn't know anything about the stuff that we were doing, but he just had the most energy and spirit and, really was present for it. And so like how you meet a girl and you make a mixtape? I made a mixtape for him. So, I put James Brown, Bootsy, P-Funk, who else? A bunch of reggae stuff and Fela, sort of African reggae funk mixtape.
Wow.
And he totally ate it up and,
Said, learn all this?
Yeah, or just,
just
check it out. This is cool. Kind of a lot of the stuff we're doing. And he started writing all these tunes that were just amazing. And, and then we would do things like, so since we were rehearsing every day, we always had a lot of time to experiment with stuff. So we would write stuff that was in 2 different time signatures at once. And so cool. Which ended up being a large, we did a reunion a couple of years ago and had to go learn all that stuff. And I was like, God, every tune has this section where we're in all these different crazy time signatures.
Just insisted on being different.
Yeah, exactly. Well, just, you rehearse all that time and it gets to the point where
just kind of
all the other stuff is just there.
Yeah.
And then, what else do you work on? Well, and it in a way it's similar to what like the Grateful Dead were working on when Mickey came in with the Indian music.
Gotcha.
That sort of thing. So it's one of those things that's there to be explored. And so cool. Then it was sometime around that time that, our friend up in the attic was hanging out with Fish. And so he introduced us to them. And I guess they came to see us play somewhere. And so Mike wanted some lessons to learn how to slap. So I taught him some stuff. And then we just started hanging out a lot. We just, had a lot of fun. And then would make these crazy tapes. And, he's up for anything. He's just one of those people who...
That's awesome.
Will try anything, and he learns so much. He's like a musical sponge. And I made him a tape too. And, we had that first lesson, and that night he was playing at the Paradise in Boston, and already he was like incorporating the stuff that I was showing him.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And then he would tease me a few years later. He's like, all right, I'm almost ready for another lesson. And so we started playing shows with those guys. And
wow,
what was really cool, I mean, playing shows with them was great. And they were still, they were playing bars of 800 to 1,000 people. It wasn't a big thing. They didn't have a record deal yet. They were kind of still like the hot local band.
Yep.
And we would also hang out with them a lot and talk about rehearsal techniques and, where we were getting music from. And,
wow.
We also got introduced to Widespread Panic through them.
Cool.
And, and every time they'd play in Boston, they'd come down to our basement afterwards and jam till the sun came up, and all these awesome experiences. And
That's
it was
a cool world.
It was a great world. I mean, it was really, this thing where it wasn't a big deal yet, and everybody was just doing it to have fun and learn what they could learn. And,
Oh my gosh.
although Trey told us the story about when he decided to stop teaching lessons, because up until that point, you could just call him
You're
up,
a working musician, right?
take lessons, and learn what he had to teach.
God.
And this kid called him up and said, "Yeah, I'd like to take guitar lessons." And so he shows up, and he's got like 3 or 4 friends with him, and they're sitting on the couch. He's trying to teach him lessons, and he keeps getting up and going to hang out with his friends and pulling tubes and stuff. And Trey is like, "What's going on here? You're paying me to teach you this stuff, and I've got a lot to show you. Let's get to work." And then finally the guy gets up and goes into the kitchen and starts making himself a sandwich in Trey's kitchen. So
Was that wasn't like a fan thing, or was it a fan?
I think it was just a fan thing of some guys like, "I'm going to go hang out at Trey's house."
Trey's house and pay him to teach me guitar. Wow.
So,
I guess you'd probably have to go to invite only after that or something.
Yeah, I mean, they were getting to the point where they realized that they had to kind of put up a little bit of a barrier.
A bit, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
and that's 1980, 90?
That was 90, 91, something like that.
Cool.
Yeah. Wow. And
that's a really neat little.
And
it's almost a sidebar, but it's not really a sidebar. It's part of the story too. That's so.
Yeah,
cool.
I mean, the whole thing about my life coming up through all of that, it was all, everything was part of everything else. And a couple of years later, there was Dawn and I were up in Burlington. We were playing up there, and the next morning we went out to breakfast with Mike. And Mike is sometimes a little oblique. Like,
okay,
you're not always sure that you're like connecting with him.
Gotcha.
And at that brunch, Don was telling his girlfriend or somebody about is it the Gila monsters? And they have like these serrated teeth, and so they bite you. It's either that or the Komodo dragons, I think is the one.
And they infect you with their saliva,
because there's gunk on their teeth. Their teeth, they're serrated, and they catch old meat, and they get bacteria and this horrible stuff. And they bite you, and they follow you around, wait for you
to die.
So she's telling this person all about, these Komodo dragons. And then later she's like, I don't even think that Mike really notices that I'm there. Does he like me? Does he not like me? What's going on? And they used to have the newsletter, the Doniak Schweiss with Mike's Corner.
Okay.
And about 3 weeks later, the Mike's Corner was her story about the Komodo dragons, word for word.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
Yeah. So
she was there.
He saw her. He totally sees her.
That's cool, though. Some people, they have those faces. Hard to read sometimes. Hard to get through.
Yeah. And, he's got a lot of stuff going on in his mind. And, he's somebody's always curious, always creative, always thinking. And, so that's his path.
That's where
So we played up there another time, and he invited this friend of his down who was starting a management and booking company to come see us. Cool. So Mike actually hooked us up with our booking agent.
That's awesome.
It was great. And he was also ended up working with a bunch of the other bands from, the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s in the early jam band scene.
Cool. In New England specifically, or was it kind of all over?
Or? Mostly New England. And I'm trying to remember, what's the name? Maybe it'll come to me. But he ended up, he had somebody working with him who was a booking agent, and all of a sudden we went from making $30,000 or $40,000 a year to like $200,000 a year.
Hell yeah.
And so we had a lot of stuff to pay off, and we decided to make a record. And so we had to deal with that. We bought a truck. We had a PA. We got a sound guy.
So you're getting into it.
Yeah, and we play all up and down, all throughout the East Coast. So I think the furthest south we played was maybe south of DC somewhere, and then all the way up into Maine. And then he started sending us out to Colorado. And
Oh my gosh.
we had this experience the summer before we went to Colorado, where we were playing on Martha's Vineyard for a 4th of July party.
Cool.
And there were like 600 people in the woods. And, we were playing all day. The cops showed up and they just hung out and listened. And, they weren't going to shut us down. And so the next winter in February, we went on our tour to Colorado. And Fish gave us their mailing list, which they stopped doing
That's
shortly after that. And so between Fish's mailing list and the fact that people in the summer go to hang out in Martha's Vineyard and then go skiing in Colorado in the winter and knew us and brought all their friends,
Yup.
we started selling out every place we played. So
Wow.
we played within the first couple of weeks that the Fox Theater was open. And so they gave us this deal where they said, all right, we'll pay you $2 for everybody that comes through the door, thinking they'd owe us like $300, $400. 800 people came through that door. And the owner was like, all right, how about if I give you a case of beer and $600? And I'm like, no, here's the contract.
No,
so we had
you said
contracts.
$2.
We had
Good.
contracts for every show.
Wow.
And it
So
was
you guys
amazing.
went legit. That seems like a real quick kind of journey. Obviously, grinding for a while and playing the music and shedding
Yeah.
and rehearsing, but that seems like a pretty quick moment to kind of, we're
It
doing
seems
this
quick
now.
from retrospect. You
Yeah.
know, when you're going through it, you really have no idea what's coming and, how it's going to be. So we never really made it to the tour bus level and
Yeah.
all of that stuff.
But
And then,
It's a-
and then we broke up
oh,
in 1994. And so after
2
that,
years before I was even born.
well,
Bummer.
welcome to the planet.
Exactly.
So
Wow.
after that, I played around in Boston a little bit, and then also got some live sound gigs. And I got to work sound for the sound company, who had a couple of venues that they supplied sound people for, and then also did, one-off events and weddings and stuff like that. So,
Cool.
that was pretty interesting. I went into it with a lot more theoretical experience in the live sound world than I did.
Application.
Than
like
application.
actually doing it.
Although in Chakra, I was one of those people who always felt like if we keep things under our own control, then it's going to be a lot easier to manage. So, I bought a monitor rig with a splitter, and we mixed our own monitors on stage and did all that
so
stuff.
you're, at least that's a level above most.
Yeah, and
being
I'd
able
been
to-
working in the recording studios, and I'd been fearless with a soldering iron since I was 15, and
Good.
and rewired all my own instruments and things like that.
That's so cool.
And
Holy
then,
moly.
so I spent a year just kind of figuring out what was going on, and in the meantime, my wife had graduated from art school, and then she got an after-school job. I mean, her story is crazier than mine.
We should get her on. I love it.
Yeah, she's probably. At some point, I'll have to do this with Xander
Please.
and Dawn.
Pass the invitation along.
I'll definitely do that. But she got an after-school job working at this place where people would come in off the street and play with essential oils and make scents.
Wow.
And she's synesthetic, so it means her
Yeah.
senses combine. So
Okay.
she can see smells and.
I didn't
and
realize
things like
that was what that word meant. I thought that it was only, or synesthesia is, I thought it was only being able to see music, essentially, or colorize music.
Different people have different sensory overlap.
Okay.
So for
Wow.
her, it's mostly color and smell. So
That's awesome.
yeah, so she started doing that, and it turned out she was really good at it. I mean, she kind of talked her way in. She had no experience, and
Yeah.
but she worked really hard at it. Every week, she'd bring home a couple of different oils and learn what their smell was, learn what the chemistry was, learn what the history was, learn what the aromatherapy things were.
Holy moly.
And I mean, she's one of these people who just really is always thinking, always creative.
It's churning
And-
up there at all times.
Exactly.
Cool.
And so by the time Chakra broke up, she had graduated, and the owner of the business had sold it to her and another employee because he was HIV positive
Oh wow,
and didn't want to spend the rest of his life trying to pay rent on Newbury Street in Boston.
it's fair.
So she and her partner moved it into another business run by this complete psychotic guy who had been the regional sales manager for McDonald's before cocaine overtook him. And, he just, oh yeah, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You cannot make this stuff up.
That sounds like something straight out of a movie. Truly.
It is. And so they're on the first block of Newbury Street, right across the street from Brooks Brothers.
Wow.
And so all these,
High-end.
very wealthy people are coming in for spa treatments and stuff.
Okay.
And Dawn and Sarah are back there with their oils making stuff. But, Dawn is one of these people who's really outgoing. And so she was making friends out on the street and stuff. And she met this guy who called himself Jimi Hendrix, who was this black guy who was a Vietnam vet who really was suffering pretty badly from post-traumatic stress from all of that. But a super sweet guy and
Wow.
and really into music and everything. And
he was
a
character of.
he was a character.
Wow.
So on her birthday, he comes into this place with cowboy boots, shorts, a tuxedo jacket, a tie, and a violin with 2 strings on it, and is like sawing away at this thing, going, "Happy birthday, Dawn!
Oh, I
Happy
love
birthday!" And there's like all these people from Brookline and the expensive suburbs going, "Oh my God, who is this guy?" And Dawn is just grinning ear to ear. So yeah, Jimmy was awesome. I ran into him once there, and the Grateful Dead were in town, and he had this big poncho with Jerry like right in the middle and Steelies and stuff. And I was like, "Are you going down to the show?" And he's like, "Well, I went down there last night, and somebody gave me this stuff and said something about Beavis and Butthead, and I don't know what Beavis and Butthead is, so what's this Beavis and Butthead?" So I took the Beavis and Butthead, and then I went home and I saw Beavis and Butthead, and just like,
His story. That's no
yeah.
end.
Beavis and Butthead blotter.
Wow.
So,
Oh wow. Oh
yeah.
I get it now.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, it took me a second.
so he experienced Beavis and Butthead.
Wow. Truly.
But
That's
Yeah.
unreal.
so there was about a year period where I was just kind of drifting, and she was doing this business. And then her boss, or what, not her boss, but the guy who owned the business in which her business was situated, came up with this scheme whereby he'd franchise the whole business to the Sheraton hotels of Canada, including Dawn's business.
Wow.
And Dawn is like, "What are you talking about? This is my business. You can't sell this as part of your business.
Yeah.
We've got secret formulas. We've got suppliers that we're not going to tell you who they are. We've got all this stuff going on. You don't own access to any of it."
Yeah.
And he finally, she was 22, her partner was 22, so he's this misogynist guy who thinks he's going to roll over these women and they're just going to,
Snaky.
yeah.
Ugh.
So he finally says, and this is in the fall, coming up to Christmas, which is the most busy period of the year, and he says to her, "Look, you either do it or you're out of here." So we borrowed my dad's van, we drove down there, we took everything out, and then we put it all in our apartment, which was pretty crazy. So she worked out of there for a while.
Oh my God.
And then in the spring, we went on our honeymoon, and she had met somebody while she came out on Chakra tour to Colorado in Telluride who wanted to open a store in Boulder and loved what she did. So
Cool.
they said, "I tell you what, I'll get you an apartment. I'll pay first and last on it. I'll give you a corner of the store.
Nice.
Guys will move out here. It'll be awesome." And so let's go for it. Let's do this.
Cool.
And so we were on our honeymoon in Europe for a month, and then we get a message while we're in Venice saying that she forgot to do her due diligence and she can't open the store because all of her suppliers have non-compete contracts with other businesses in Boulder.
Oh.
So, we've already let go of our apartment in Boston,
Yeah.
and neither of us then really have jobs out there. And we got a place to live for a couple months, but we said, "All right, let's go.
Cool.
Let's go to Colorado.
Let's do it. Still.
Let's do it." And so we came out here, and Dave had moved out here a month or a year before. And so he was starting up a band, and I joined that band for a while, which was
Cool.
um,
That's
a very...
Lewell. How do you? Is that Dave
What's
Lewell,
that?
or am I getting?
No, Dave
name?
Watts.
Sorry, Dave Watts. Sorry, Jesus.
Yeah,
no.
Dave Watts.
Okay, thank you.
Drummer.
Sorry, thank you.
So this band was led by this woman who was the daughter of one of the founders of Naropa, who was a poet.
Wow.
And so she grew up with Allen Ginsberg at the breakfast table, or Amiri Baraka, or all these heavy guys from the beat poetry world. And
That's pretty cool.
All that stuff. Yeah, she was great. And Maya Dorn, and she's still out there doing stuff in California.
How do you spell the last name?
Dorn.
Cool.
And her father was Ed Dorn, who's, very famous poet in the beat world. And so she wrote all these songs that were like stream of consciousness poetry songs, and she was self-taught on the guitar and wasn't always really paying attention to whether there were 4 beats in each bar or not.
Yeah.
And so
stream of consciousness, truly.
Yeah, and interesting chords. It's like, I like how these notes sound, so this is the chord.
Cool.
And so, and we also rehearsed every day. We did, put a lot of work into it. We toured a lot. We got a booking agent. And it was a little bit ahead of its time. It had like 2 women fronting the band, and this is the late 90s, and it would have blown up 10 years later.
Yeah.
Which is also true of Chakra. I mean, in the late 80s and early 90s, people really weren't into the funk thing.
They weren't ready for it yet.
They weren't ready for it. But we played some great music and hung out with some great people. We played a gig in Telluride during the Bluegrass Festival.
Oh, cool.
And Dave was playing with, who was it? This guy is great banjo player and slide guitar player, whose name is escaping me. But so we all got backstage passes, and while hanging out backstage, we ran into Jeff Coffin from the Flecktones, the sax player.
Wow.
And we invited him to come down and hang out. And oh God, I gotta remember this guy's name, because so the first 3 nights we played as Skin, the name of that band, and so that was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Saturday night we backed up our friend, and he had Daryl Anger come down, and Sally Van Meter, and like all these heavy bluegrass Americana guys.
That's awesome.
And I'm embarrassed that I can't remember his name, because he's an amazing human being, and we played a bunch. And then Jeff Coffin came in and sat in for that one. And then the next night, on Sunday night, Skin played again. And a bunch of those characters came down again. So we had Daryl Anger on the fiddle, and Jeff Coffin came, and he was playing with us. And I look up, and Victor Wooten is like 10 feet in front of me. And I'm thinking, I can't play in front of Victor Wooten. Not especially after my second margarita. I just can't do this. And so I invited him to sit in with us, thinking, okay, this is at about 11:30. And he says, yeah, sure, that's great. And we, I had 2 inputs on the bass amp.
Oh my God.
And we played, and he played at 12, or 12:30, they locked the door because they couldn't be open. And they were like, it's a private party. We played till 2. And he was just so into it. It was like, and he caught all the crazy time signature stuff, all the crazy chords.
Wow.
Without even thinking about it.
A night with Victor. That's
a
insane.
night with Victor. And all these other guys.
Yeah, true.
And what's interesting about Victor is everybody knows him for all this flashy stuff, the triple thumbing and tapping and all this stuff. He did some tapping, but most of it was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was like gentle, supportive, like in the pocket. Like he was a missing member of the band.
Wow.
And none of that flashy stuff.
Yeah.
Although we had to do the obligatory double bass jam, sort of,
I'm sure it's just
gunslinging kind of thing. And finally I was like, all right,
Victor.
You win.
You win this round.
And actually, right before that, so have you heard of the Everyone Orchestra?
That sounds familiar, but I can't say for
Matt Butler.
No, unfortunately.
Prior to the Everyone Orchestra was the Zambiland Orchestra, which was sort of a Colonel Bruce offshoot.
Oh, cool.
And so it was set up as a big, huge group of musicians, and it was all improvisational, and it was conducted, and there were certain things you had to know. And, like the conductor would call out a key change. So you'd reach in your pocket, take your keys out, and give it to the next guy next to you and swap keys. And the players were ridiculous. There were a bunch of the guys from Leftover Salmon, and then Paul McCandless, the horn player.
Okay.
So I became aware of him in high school because he played oboe in this band called Oregon. And they sort of created, earlier they were put together to play with Paul Winter Consort. And they sort of created the whole concept of new age music in a way.
Cool.
Okay, they had oboe, acoustic guitar, tabla,
wow,
that kind of stuff. But it was sort of like what I had experienced with Chakra, where like the guys in the band were great, but they were being led by this person who just wasn't up to their level and not as experimental as them.
Yep.
And so they changed their name to Oregon, got rid of Paul Winter, and went on and did this amazing stuff. And they were sort of like the acoustic Grateful Dead in the sense that all of their music were jumping off points to other stuff. And they would show up and they say, okay, we don't know what this is called. We don't even know if it has its name. We've never played it before. We're just going to play.
Oh.
And so I would go see them in the, early 80s. And as an oboe player, Paul McCandless was this improviser who was just amazing. And so a complete hero. And so I'm on stage with him to my left. And then, Sean Lane. Do you know about him?
I want to say, but I hear so many names that I'm reluctant to say 100%.
Sean Lane at 13 years old was part of Black Oak, Arkansas. He was a prodigy guitar player from the South.
Okay.
And then grew up and started playing like jazz fusion and things like that. So he was there playing with Jonas Hellborg, who had played with John McLaughlin.
Wow.
And Jeff Sipe from Aquarium Rescue Unit.
That's awesome.
And so he's this crazy guitar player who's so virtuosic. And I'm sandwiched between these two guys, plus this other guy, Ross Martin, who's local, who's just brilliant and raging guitar player. And there's 3 other bass players on stage, and all I'm doing is playing effects. So I've got, a whole rack of effects and loops and crazy stuff.
No, did you have an in?
I was playing a bass.
Okay.
Yeah, I was playing my bass.
Effects.
So that was like the night before I go to Telluride.
Oh my God.
It was like this whole insane week, and then we also mastered our album that week, and it's just one of these mythical weeks of music.
That's beautiful, though.
Oh, it was amazing.
Experience after experience, piling up.
Yeah, just, again, that was when Boulder was sort of like what that scene was in Boston or New England when the jam band thing was starting.
Wow, just so much energy and
so much going on.
Not
and
untapped, but it's just about to overflow and pour out into the rest of the nation.
And we had this farm. Dave Watts lived there, and Tony Furtado was the slide guitar and banjo player we were playing with.
I know that name from Bluegrass World.
I mean, he was winning awards when he was 15, and
cool.
One of those guys.
So prodigy bluegrass player.
They had this farm they called Double Dig Farm.
Okay.
That was on the outskirts of town, and so most of the guys from String Cheese lived there at one point or another. Cool. And we had friends who would come in on tour, like the guys from G Love and Special Sauce would pull their bus up.
G Love's been playing up here, like a couple miles down the road recently. That's awesome.
Yeah, you should go say hi to the bass player and tell him you know me.
Really? Oh, it's not. It's a new band, unfortunately.
Oh, so it's not Special Sauce.
He's got the organist from Slightly Stupid playing with him. I think.
Okay.
I think it's the Juice is now the new. But if the Special Sauce ever comes around, I will make sure to make that happen.
Definitely. They actually started out of our band house in Boston.
That's insane.
Which was called Neptune. So Jim, the bass player, used to run these Monday night jam sessions at a bar down the street. And so Garrett showed up to one of those and Houseman. And it just, next thing you know, they're out in Europe opening Arrested Development. I mean, they blew up quick.
That's so cool. Sorry, G Love, I interrupted there, but I forget what you were.
So just all these different people who are coming through. and African musicians, and
Awesome.
we'd go to the Fox or the Boulder Theater and,
Yeah.
and meet people and invite them back to come hang out and jam with us, and it was just a great scene. And then finally, the owner of the farm decided to develop the property and put up 250 condo buildings where the farm was, and so we had a goodbye double dig concert at the Boulder Theater where we took the whole living room and brought it up on the stage.
That's so
making
fun.
popcorn and doing the whole thing while everybody who ever lived there played at least a few songs.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a great
What
experience.
a cool.
But
That's a beautiful way to kind of throw a party for your beloved
yeah.
home.
So after that band broke up, I spent a lot of time playing, sort of just freelancing and things
Yeah.
like that. And
Doing all is this production freelancing stuff.
well, bass playing,
bass playing,
freelancing mostly.
okay.
And I also started a location recording business, which I didn't get going too far because I kept getting gigs and having to tour and stuff like
Gotcha.
that. And I toured with like this progressive rock fusion band called the Ethereal Plane. That was
Cool.
really fun. Yeah,
I'll have
that
to
was
check
great.
that out.
I don't know if there's recordings out there, but it, I don't know how to describe it, but definitely fusiony.
Cool.
And then after a while, I ran into this woman who said that Great American Taxi was looking for a new bass player. So I auditioned with them, and then a week later went on the road. And it's one of these things where they gave me a copy of their CD and 3 live tapes, and we drove all the way to California, and then they didn't play anything off of it, any of those, for the first gig and a half.
Like I learned all 62.
Yeah, I learned and I had told myself no charts for this band ever.
Good.
No
Yeah,
charts. I'm going to learn this stuff by ear.
That's nice.
And, all of a sudden it's like, all right, you're the bass player.
It's an
You start
endeavor.
this one off. I start which one off? How does this go?
Oh God. Oh.
But,
And bass is a tough instrument. Like it's less forgiving when you miss a note.
yeah, totally.
And
And
guitar, it's like
and especially if you're doing bluegrass style stuff, it's like you're on the beat of every chord change.
all day.
So I spent basically the next 3 years playing with those guys, and playing with Vince is just and just hanging out with Vince is just amazing.
That's awesome.
And so we got to meet lots of cool people through that. Met this guy, Howard, God, I forget his last name, but he was part of the 60s scene, and he was a record collector back then. And so when the Charlatans, the Grateful Dead, all these bands needed material, they'd come to him. And Jerry described him as somebody who had more records than God.
Whoa.
Yeah. He's he was this crazy, far out dude. And I think I've actually got I might have his business card still. Oh yeah,
that's
here we
awesome.
go. Glenn
Yes, please.
Glenn Howard. How cool is
That
it
is-
when R. Crumb makes your business card?
Oh my God.
So
That's incredible.
he, and he knew all that early music stuff, like, the R. Crumb Cheap Suit Serenaders, and, when the Grateful Dead were doing those old blues tunes.
Yeah.
And
That came from his collection?
a lot of that came from his collection. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And-
I'm picturing like some of the JGB repertoire. I don't know if they were still. I
Maybe
know
s-
John Kahn had a lot to do with the expansion
Yeah.
also, but anyway,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
And probably stuff like, what's the Viola Blues?
Yeah,
All the jug band stuff.
yeah,
That
that
kind of
came
stuff.
from him.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure multiple other places, but he's this amazing character.
Wow.
But, it's hard to live a life as a character, so, get your rent paid and store your records and stuff. I mean, he's a national treasure. He should have a real archive.
That's awesome. Yeah, he's still.
Well, as of
Hanging
10
around.
years ago, we were carousing at 3 a.m. in San Francisco.
Wow.
And then, playing with people like Sam Bush and, just all the bluegrass stars, because Vince is really part of that scene.
That's awesome.
And then in 2009, I decided that as I approached 50, I did not want to lose my brain, so I better do something that would challenge it. So I decided to go to law school. And the other thing about it was, my initial reason for becoming a musician was the inspiration from Gil Scott-Heron. And, still having the idea that music can change the world in a real way. And I'm not so sure that it really can, like it used to be able to do.
Yeah.
It's a very different thing.
That's a heavy sentence, but
yeah. I felt like, all right, if I can't do it through music, I need to do it more directly.
Awesome.
So,
God, taking it by his horns, eh?
Yeah. Well, then the first week that I am in school, I get this call from a friend of mine who's in this band called Shakedown Street, which is actually the longest running Grateful Dead cover band in Colorado.
I've been to their website.
Yeah, and he's like, so I hear that you quit Taxi. You want to play some gigs with us? And, I kind of was like, okay, I'll play a couple of gigs. And then I found myself getting gradually more and more sucked in. And I hadn't really, I'd played a couple of the tunes here and there, but hadn't really addressed the repertoire since I was in high school.
Wow.
So it was...
So that's a long, many years in between, but then you're doing almost a full circle back to Grateful Dead.
Right. And my very first bass was a Gibson EB2D.
Yeah.
Which I'd souped up with Bartolini pickups and a badass bridge and everything.
That's awesome. And that had the big fat humbucker in it, right?
Yeah, I hated that.
Yeah.
I ended up selling that for a big profit. So I had a P bass, a Bartolini P bass by the neck, and then, a little humbucker by the bridge. And then as I was getting ready to go to Berkeley, I was thinking, oh my God, they're going to laugh me out of there if I show up with this thing and playing with a pick. I got to play with my fingers. I got to play a Fender. I got to, So about my 6th semester there, I find out that the person who designed the bass department was Steve Swallow, who was playing a Gibson semi-hollow body bass with a pick. And part of me is like, what would have happened if I just stuck with that?
Shown up, yeah. Interesting.
But so I know there's all these things in my life where, there's
the road not taken.
Yeah. Well, and also the way that things kind of, different parts of my life speak to each other.
Yeah.
In different ways.
I'm fascinated by that. I've heard more like memorable and meaningful mashups of art in this podcast episode alone that I've heard in the last 6 months. That's so cool. The book still is my favorite.
Well, and then also Paul McCandless and being so into him and following him throughout his life in Oregon. And then Colonel Bruce, after he left ARU, came to Boston and was playing this tiny little club there. And I go in, and who do I see on stage with him but Paul McCandless? And I'm like,
my God.
What is this? These two worlds completely colliding. And how do you know each other? And it's like, well, we used to play in R&B bands in 1970 in Atlanta. It's crazy. So
Everywhere is connected.
It is. And the big thing that I've learned in the last maybe 15 or 20 years is that you can't make any assumptions about how people will judge music and how they'll judge anything really. And, when I was in high school and discovered the Grateful Dead, or junior high school, it was super underground. I mean, the punk thing was starting up, and then a lot of pop stuff was happening, and they were just sort of seen as these kind of 60s, psychedelic something that had, wasn't really anything. And, the 5777 show, when I get there, I discovered I'm in the second balcony, and there's a notch cut out for my seat, so that the seat can go down to accommodate this concrete girder that's going to the ceiling to hold the ceiling up. And in order to sit in the seat, you have to wrap your leg around this thing and try to wedge it, and it's like your nose is right up against it. And I went up to one of the ushers and I'm like, "What's going on? You can't sell this seat. This is more than obstructed view." And he's like, "Well, you can buy another ticket." So, tickets were relatively easy to come by. Yeah, the first one I think I saw was 650 at the Music Hall in Boston.
That's really nice. Now
Yeah.
you could easily drop 650 with no decimal.
That's right. That's right.
Well, I guess now you can't, but
Right.
in a normal world,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
So, yeah, it is. It's a crazy life.
So you were playing some gigs with Shakedown Street, and while simultaneously entering law school. Did music win there? Did law? Obviously, you've made it through law school now. So
Yeah, I mean, law
congratulations.
school was kind of an experiment. It was one of those things where, like, what would happen if I took the LSAT? What would happen if I applied? What would happen if I went? What would happen if I
showed up to court?
What would happen if I took my final exams? And
That's great.
But it really wasn't until the end of my second semester that things really started to click there.
Cool.
I would say that I'm proud to prop up the grades for my classmates, because everything's graded on a curve.
Okay.
So somebody has to get the F. Yeah. I never got Fs. I mean, I got some Cs and B minuses and stuff,
but you weren't the one that was getting the hundreds because of the curves.
Oh, I didn't even pretend to try to get to the top of the class. But my goal was not to be in a huge law firm making $1 million a year, because I didn't want to work 80 hours a week.
Who would?
So, and then the other thing that happened was that a month after I graduated, we had our first kid.
Oh wow!
After being together for 21 years.
That's a bit wow.
And the birth really went very badly.
Oh no!
So he aspirated meconium, which is the first poop that they have.
Yeah.
And his lungs shredded and collapsed, and then his heart stopped, and he lost oxygen, and Flight for Life took him to Children's, where they cooled his brain for 3 days, and we spent a couple years in intensive therapy with him. But at 16 months, neurology discharged him, and said that by 18 months, he had to know 18 words to be on track. And at 17 months, we decided to count, and we lost track at 120. And when he turned 2, we had a speech therapist come, because he was saying words backwards. So, like, James Brown for him would have been, I feel Doug. And some of it was like, some of the words were so, it's like, how do you know how to say that backwards if you can't spell it?
You're clearly doing the processing. That's
right.
Incredible.
And so she came with all this material to go over with him, and he walked up, and he's incredibly social, so he walked up with his books and showed them to her, and she looked at us after about 5 minutes and said, I think he knows about 2,000 words. And he's super into music. Like, when he was 5, like, he discovered funk, and he also discovered how to operate YouTube. And so we had to listen to Bootsy stretching out like 15 times a day, and then finally he's like, Mom, Dad, I have to be Bootsy for Halloween. So we got him the star glasses. Like, we raided thrift stores and got him this whole outfit and a little cutout cardboard base, and he'd ring the doorbell and go, Hallelujah! Twinkle, twinkle, baby.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I think he rewired his brain better than it would have been. I mean, he's this beautiful, compassionate, generous, loving kid.
That's beautiful.
And
love hearing that.
Really wants to play the drums, but he just does not practice enough. As kids will.
Especially when he has a dad that, has shredded a few times in his life.
Yeah. No, he loves coming to our gigs, and,
That's awesome.
Yeah. He's
very
good.
Cool. And how old is he now?
8.
Wow. Cool. I forget how recent this is. I was thinking we were in the 80s for so long that I forgot we're talking about this is like nowadays.
He was born in 2012, like, the end of the Mayan calendar.
Yeah, true. Oh my
He's like a kid of the future. And it was crazy. Like, we've got all these fires going on here right now.
I was going to ask about that. I saw that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
Well, I think it's snowing already, but we're better than we were. But when he was born, it was the year of the dragon, and the day he was born, the High Park fire up by Fort Collins started, which turned into the biggest fire in Colorado history. And then when we got out of the NICU, about a day or two before that, the Waldo Canyon fire started, in the southern part of the state. And then we brought him home, and 2 days later, a fire started like a mile from us, so we had to evacuate because he was still on oxygen.
Wow.
It was crazy.
Year of the Dragon for
The
sure.
Year of the Dragon. He's a dragon baby. But now he's super into hip hop and
So cool.
Yeah.
Are you serving as a record curator?
Oh no, he's
type
beyond
person?
me. He's like,
Okay.
he's got Siri, he's got YouTube,
Okay.
he's got,
That's cool.
I had to put the parental controls on. But he's all about Snoop Dogg and
That's
all
great.
this stuff. Yeah.
I remember 7 and 8 for me was huge hip hop. Like, oh wow, this is cool. I like this music a lot. It was
Yeah.
pre rock and roll actually, which is funny generationally. But
Oh, it's true for him too. I mean, he, the rock and roll thing. Although I have a video of him air drumming to Mr. Charlie somewhere, which is just awesome.
holy moly! So here you are now. You practice law. You have one child. Two? Do you have? Okay.
No, we're not going to go through that again.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's fair. And you still play music, obviously. You.
Yep.
What does that look like now?
Well,
Pre-COVID, if you want.
Pre-COVID, it was maybe 4 or 5 gigs a month.
Cool.
And then I've also expanded my location recording business.
Nice.
So that was largely supported by a friend of mine who started out doing house concerts and has, he's basically like, there's all this music I'd love to hear, but there's no venue for it. So I'm going to have it done in my living room.
Perfect.
So he's super into Brazilian music, especially
Cool.
Brazilian guitar music and jazz and some experimental stuff. So I got to record Eugene Chadbourne and his electric rake, which is basically a rake with a pickup attached to it, run into a twin reverb to the point of feedback that he smashes against everything in the house.
I hope you had earplugs for that one. Maybe.
I have earplugs for everything because
That's good.
at this point my ears, I've got pretty raging tinnitus.
They took a fair share of use.
Yeah. Yeah, Dave Watts snare drum, bam!
Oh, which one was it? Left or right? Where you staged
Both.
right or left?
Well, I was staged
Both.
left, but both ears.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I think the worst hit my ears took was being on the road with Taxi and being in hotel rooms with people who snore and
wow.
having putting headphones on with sounds to drown out the snoring.
Yep. You're just white noisifying it away,
Yeah.
and yeah, we know how that goes.
Yeah, so take care of your ears, people.
Yeah, that's a big message. I always try to at least incorporate that somewhere into the show if people have listened to loud things to remind it that it's an important organ.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we can check out some basses if you want.
Yes, I would love to. This is the part of the music playing. I don't have my rig ready to go. Unfortunately, it's ready to go, but not mic'd up or anything. But Edwin here has his beautiful bass plugged in, so the listeners can enjoy.
So
I have no idea what to expect. Are you just going to lead us through a tour?
yeah, I'll just give you a tour of the bass.
Cool.
So this is a 67 Guild Starfire. Obviously not how it started out. When I got it, it just had a single pickup, one of the old Bisonic pickups. And then it's been through a bunch of different things. So the first thing I did actually was put in a pair of Bartolini triple coil pickups. So
Okay.
each pickup was sort of like a mini alembic system where you had 2 coils and then a coil with no magnet in the middle. So you could blend it with the other coils in single coil positions and still have the humbucking part of it.
Wow.
So there were 5 different combinations. You could have series and parallel of the 2 outer coils.
Oh, this
and
is
then,
just within one pickup,
Within
5
one
different
pickup.
combinations?
yeah.
Oh my
And then
God.
series and parallel with the center dummy pickup and then one or the other of the outer pickups. And that was true for both pickups. So, I had 2 big switches on it. And then I put a one of those ACG preamps, which is a filter-based preamp. So each pickup would go through a filter where you could sweep from, initially I think it was 3K, but then later modified to 6K, all the way down to 80 hertz.
Oh my God.
And then there was another set of knobs where you could blend back in the treble above that. So if you wanted a super like reggae tone, you could just like boost the hell out of that low stuff.
Whoa.
So that was pretty fun, but the problem with it is that it's really touchy. So you just barely look at the frequency knob and you'd be way out in some other frequency land.
Okay.
And then I also, there was a guy in Finland who was making hardware and pickups and things like that. And he had always wanted to experiment with the alembic world. So he made me a copy of an alembic bridge and tailpiece.
So cool.
And it had issues, so I later sold that. And then, so these are actual alembic bridges and tailpieces.
Very
And
cool.
alembic sustain block in there. And then about 10 or 11 years ago, I found, I think it was on the Alembic website, a set of very old Alembic series pickups. And they were the original caramel colored ones that Rick Turner wound. And they
So
were
fun.
super cool because although they were this shape, they were trapezoidal magnets. So the magnets would get wider as it went down to the G string. And they were also wound with very few turns of wire. So the way that pickups work is that you've got turns of wire around a magnet.
Yep.
And the more turns that you have, the more power you get out of it. And it also creates a resonance peak. And if you have a certain number of turns, the resonance peak starts happening within the audible range. But if you have just a few turns on it, the resonance peak happens outside the audible range so that you end up with a much smoother sound, but lower output, and they were also susceptible to noise, but the tone was just huge. I mean, it was like a pipe organ, really clear and deep and awesome. But one of them broke. So
Oh.
I know
Sad-
I'm
sad day.
trying to get the guys at Alembic to see if they can fix it.
I would love to
But
see
so
that.
this is a new set of Alembic pickups, and then, of course, with those things you need this big preamp card.
Oh.
So
Whoa, that's giant.
about 25 years ago, I went to a local lutherie and was like, I need to get access to the electronics in this thing, so they cut out this, and I explained to them what I wanted. They didn't get it. They made the door too small.
Okay.
So about 7 years ago, I went back to him and said, look, do you think you could do it like this and then, get it so it covers the entire bottom so I can shield it properly? He's like, oh, I get what you're doing. Okay. And, a lot of people have worked on this bass. There was the guy who made the bass player, Moradian. I'm trying to remember his first name. Jim Moradian in Boston was a famous luthier, and he also made basses for the bass player from Yes, for Chris Squire.
Wow.
And so he did the first work with the Bartolinis, and I brought it to him, and I said, this is what I want to do. And he's like, I can't do that for you. This is a vintage bass. You can't do this. And then I was like, all right, come to one of my gigs. And, I was still playing the funk stuff back then. And he said, all right, I know that you know how to play. You know what you're doing, so I'll trust you on this.
That's good.
And he was pretty psyched with how it came out.
That's man.
And
I'm glad
then-
that you have the mind to experiment with something like that. Because
You can
beautiful.
see, I don't know how many holes
No,
there are in
I
it.
could see them, but I see it and I love it. Like
Oh,
that's
I love it too.
that's
It's-
part of what makes an instrument that of unfathomable, quality, and it contains all the magic when it has the holes.
Yeah, I mean, there's been some moments where I felt like I was jumping off a cliff and wasn't sure what was going to happen or if it was going to work.
Yep.
And, the pickup rings actually were funny because this was also at Woodsong's Lutherie here in Boulder, and I got somebody else to work on those. And he was the guy who installed the other bridge that I had on here.
Okay.
And he was from San Francisco, and he grew up around the Grateful Dead, but he didn't know anything about them because he was like, Grateful Dead, really? He was like over it before he got into it. And then so finally I sat down with him and brought in my computer, showed him some pictures of what was going on, and then gave him some CDs of recordings. And so he started listening to it. And now he's like, every time I go in there, it's like, have you heard September 7th in 1973? And he's just, yeah, so.
You got him on that bus.
I got him on the bus.
That's beautiful.
And so he ended up charging me more for these pickup rings than I paid for the bass because they're perfectly shaped to the contour of the instrument. And in retrospect, I could have just cut out this block and then, put everything in and then made a cover for it, which would have been much cheaper. But, they're kind of cool.
I like it a lot.
And then brass nut up at the other end.
Oh, beautiful.
And then
That's just gorgeous.
Back, peg head.
Oh, I love the finish wear on me.
I've got some signatures. Hopefully you can.
Ooh, hang on. Let's see. Can't see it yet. You may have to read them to me, but let me see if I can figure them out. Hang on. I see what looks to be a Phil Lesh signature.
Up at the top.
Up at the top. Okay. That's the only one.
And then between the.
Between
here,
below. Yep.
Jack Cassidy.
Oh.
So those guys were my heroes like in 1973, 74.
Wow.
And they both played Starfire basses. And I met both of them in the course of my traveling and everything. So the way this bass works is that you've got filters in here. And so it looks like there's 3 pickups, but these pickups are the only ones that have magnets on them. So they pick up the sound of the string. This just picks up noise. And if you look at the back here, you've got these little holes, which I drilled badly, but I was in a hurry.
That's okay. We all do that sometimes.
There's little pots in there. Well, and the pots didn't really line up in a
you have like
line.
little trim pot, like a
They're
flathead
trim
screwdriver or something?
Exactly.
Cool.
And so the outer ones control the overall level of each pickup. So you can set the pickup height to where it sounds good and then adjust the output.
Wow.
And then the the inner ones then control how much of the noise canceller you blend in. So you go through this process of putting yourself in a very noisy situation and then tweaking those knobs until the noise cancels and it gets as quiet as possible.
That is fucking brilliant.
It is amazing.
So cool.
Now, the problem is that the card that's in here was, I think it's probably circa 1973. And so in 1973, there wasn't that much, hash and trash flying around the radio frequencies as there is now. So they could build it to a looser spec.
Gotcha.
So it's a little bit noisy.
Is that something you can go in and shield additionally, or?
Well, there's a lot of shielding in there already.
Okay.
So it's not really so much of a shielding thing as sort of tuning the circuit. And so Ron Wickersham, Mr. Alembic, has a whole process by which he puts it in the noisiest place possible and then adds in capacitance and some other things to tweak out the noise. And he can make it dead silent. I don't have the $1,000 or $1,200 to do it, and I also don't want to lose the bass for the months and months and months and months it would take. So, I deal with the noise. It's gotten a little bit better. One thing that's weird, and I don't know exactly why this happened, but I just, a couple months ago got a Ray Decker cable.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound
cables.
they're beautiful cables, and I don't want to sound like an advertisement, but somehow, I should sound like an advertisement because it's great stuff, but it's been quieter since I started using it. So maybe there's something in here with the grounding that he does that just makes it better.
Shout out to Ben. I'll have to ask him.
Ben's awesome.
See what the magic is.
And he and I are actually working on a very interesting project. So these basses have a 5-pin output. So each pickup has its own output, and then you use an external power supply.
Sorry, I just got so excited. That's so cool.
Oh, it's awesome, actually.
That's so nerdy. Yeah, I love it.
It is. So, that Jason now has Phil's Mission Control, Osiris. So.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Shrew. How do you pronounce?
Schreiner?
Schreiner?
Yeah.
Yeah. Shout out Jason. I did know that.
Yeah. Jason's also awesome. So the way that bass was set up is it had this system, except the filters, well, we'll get to these filters in a moment, but they were a lot more versatile than what these are, which is pretty much fine. And then right up against the bridge, he's got a quadraphonic pickup.
Cool.
So each string has its own output.
Yep.
And initially all those buttons on top told what string to go to which output, and in the wall of sound that meant which speaker part stack did it come out of.
So cool.
So he would have to have the 5-pin pickup. The other pins in mine are for power. You have an external power supply, plus and minus 22 volts or something in that range. And for his, you'd need 4 more outputs.
Jeez.
So I'm working with Ben on a cable that will have all of these plus my stereo in-ear monitors. So I can just plug the the monitors right into this, and then I'll probably build a box on the other end where you just plug this in and then route all the stuff out to that.
Because I'm, for some reason, being really slow trying to process this, what would your plugging your monitors into, what would condensing everything do for you?
1 cable. Because right now I have 2 cables. I don't do wireless because wireless destroys the tone. So.
Okay. So wireless in-ears, you're saying?
Yeah, that really makes the tone a lot.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have to keep that in mind.
So part of having an amazing location recording rig, I use metric halo interfaces.
Yep.
They're all super high quality, and they're also my in-ear monitor rig. So, if I were getting a send from, a Midas board or, some random front of house live board,
yep.
Maybe it wouldn't be that big a difference. But right now I've got these converters that are amazing. The mic preamps are amazing. So it just sounds like
Might
a
as
record.
well hear it all the way to your ears.
Yeah. And somehow bad sound always bothers me.
It's funny. People that are particular about sound don't like bad sound.
So... got to get myself in a comfortable position here. So what's going on with the electronics is that each pickup has a set of knobs, and the different knobs are volume, frequency, and then this is resonance, which is kind of a boost at the cutoff point. So it's a low-pass filter. So as you turn this down, it brings the high frequency down. So a normal guitar has, like a Strat or a Les Paul or Telecaster or whatever, brings down the high end, but it doesn't bring down the high end in terms of the frequency. It just brings it down in terms of the amount at a set frequency. So you can change caps to get different frequencies. But here, and then this is your pickup selector switch, so it's off, which is a very nice thing to have.
That's awesome. I want one.
And then this pickup, both, and then this pickup. So I'm going to just play this pickup for a second.
Yeah.
And so...
You're on your bridge, you said?
No, I'm on my neck.
Oh, neck. Gotcha.
So I have this thing. I think knobs that when you turn them clockwise should get brighter.
You turn them clockwise. Okay, yeah.
So when a lot of people, especially bass players, have a pan knob, they think the top of the knob should point at the pickup. But intuitively, that seems backwards to me. So I always like to go from low to high. So this is my low pickup, it's my high pickup. Even though this is higher than that one.
Oh, no, that makes sense. Yeah, that's like a Gibson layout, though, right?
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
That makes sense to me.
Or a Guild layout.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, one of the things that's a little bit weird about the Alembic setup is that when you have only one pickup on, you tend to lose a lot of gain.
Okay.
So this is going to be quieter. So this is with the filter totally turned off. And the resonance turned off. So I'll bring in some resonance. So
that's beautiful. It felt like it added in a little bit of something in the 300, 400 range.
300 is exactly it.
Okay, hey,
turn
even
this
over
off
Zoom.
That's right. So you turn this off, you get 300 hertz. Now, all the way open, then, so what I've discovered is that to get the right area for me to play around with is usually somewhere in the middle. So that sounds pretty good, but then when you bring the resonance in, then what you're really working with is the pick attack. Because otherwise, the basic tone of the bass is what it is.
Yeah.
But if you want to adjust the pick attack, then this is really useful. I think actually you're probably getting a lot from the microphone too.
I think I am, but I'm excited. When this comes out, it'll sound really perfect and polished. So.
All right, then I won't mess with that.
No, this is awesome. I'm just imagining the final product as I can hear it through Zoom right now.
So that's the neck pickup. The bridge pickup is really pretty thin.
It's got like it reminds me of a Rickenbacker bridge with the cap pulled out or something.
Right.
I forget what it was, the push-pull vintage
that was actually with the resonance all the way on.
Nice.
So really, to my mind, the best position is both pickups on and working with the amount of pick attack that you get from either pickup, and then also blending them to a certain degree. And the Phil's bass, the Godfather, was basically the same system, except instead of just having a low pass filter, he could have a high pass filter or a band pass filter.
Was it on a switch or was it 3 separate knobs?
One of the knobs was a multi-position switch.
Gotcha.
And then the coolest part about it is that you could then blend back in the dry, unfiltered signal. So you could find something with the filter that's really cool, but then you could sort of bring it into balance with the rest of the sound.
Yeah, so you're not just 100% like, hey, look at my cool effect.
Right.
I love that.
And that, that to me is like the big thing about that whole system. And you can basically get the same thing in the rack mount super filter.
Wow.
So that's exactly what they have in there. And, but it's I've thought about actually replacing all of this with a super filter. I had a friend who did that, but...
but that's so many years of design and...
Yeah, and then this just also works.
Yeah.
This just does what it does.
I'm not familiar with the rack mount super filter.
It's one of the Alembic preamps.
Okay, gotcha.
And truthfully, I have one, but I rarely use it.
Cool.
Because what I've discovered is that really the things that I want to change are the presence of the bass. So, how quickly it punches through, or whether it sort of sits in the back and is more pillowy. And this is totally capable of doing all of that.
Yeah.
And anything else I can do off the bass. So usually with this bass, I use the Alembic F2B.
Yeah. I saw you talking about that, I think, last month or so on Facebook.
Yeah, and that's, it's basically like having a dual showman in a rack. That's and the other thing that is cool, so Alembic for decades now has come with a basic power supply. So you plug the 5-pin connector into it, and it can give you a mono or stereo output. And back in the day, I'm sure you've seen pictures from 1973 where Phil's got that big rack with all those rack mount units in it.
Oh, yeah.
So one of those units, and he had 3 of each of them. So because he had the quad pickup. So what the other unit was something called the IN2 input module, which is really cool. It's so it's basically a power supply, so you can get power to the bass, but then it's got all this switching in it plus a DI. So
oh my God.
What the switching allows you to do is to have it be stereo, reverse stereo, mono, both pickups, mono one pickup, mono the other pickup. And then in the back, it's got a norm. Well, this is like a audio engineering term, but a normaled effects loop. So you don't plug anything in; it just passes through.
Yep.
You plug it, then you can plug. So what I plug in is the F2B in that patch setup.
Awesome.
And it's actually the only time when the way the Olympics are designed that it makes sense, because the way that the F2B is set up is that the inputs are in the front and the outputs are in the back. And that's also true for the IN2. So a lot of times when you're trying to run into a rack mount effects or whatever before your input, you have to go from a wire from the back of the rack around to the front.
Okay.
But with the IN2, you come out the front inputs, go into the inputs of the F2B, you come out of the back, and then you can go to effects, and then you come back into the back inputs of the IN2. And then your DIs are right there.
Jesus. You lost me at the last chain. The last chain of those words. That's amazing, though.
The DIs also have ground lift, and then you can also flip the polarity on them.
Too cool. And the switching box you said had reverse stereo?
So it just means that this pickup could go to the left channel, or you could flip it and then it goes to the right channel, and this goes to the left channel.
That's so cool.
So, I mean, it's mostly a question of what's convenient at the time. Yeah. So, I mean, this instrument does a lot of things, and it's also, bearing in mind that I'm totally out of shape. It can go to a lot of great tones, and with round wounds on it, it's got a killer slap tone.
That's awesome. You have flats on it now?
I've got flats. These are the Pyramid Gold flats.
Very cool.
And I think they're awesome.
Is that a light gauge or a regular, or what? I don't even know bass string gauges.
So I guess it's probably considered pretty light. One of the things I've discovered about bass strings, especially the lower ones, so a string, if you think about physics, a string vibrates in a certain way, and a perfect string has no stiffness at all. It's just a string.
Yeah.
As the gauge gets bigger, you get more and more stiffness at the ends, and that's why we have to compensate with the bridge, so that the vibrating part gets lined up with the vibrating part of the rest of the strings.
Damn, that's why. Wow.
So the other thing about it is that the thicker the string, the less it starts vibrating like a string. When you have, about the overtone series, so you have the open string, the octave,
first harmonic,
and so on.
Yeah.
And they're all lined up to a degree, but the heavier the string is, the more they get out of whack.
Wow.
So, the extreme way to describe it would be, if you have a super thick string, it doesn't vibrate like a string. It sounds like a metal bar being hit. It gets a more clangorous tone. So a light string gives you a truer sense of what the pitch is and what the note is.
Cool.
And it's easier to have it play in tune throughout the instrument.
That is the best explanation I could have ever hoped for why bass strings are chosen. And I guess that applies to all strings, too.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in guitar string land,
it's all high up anyway, so we're not really running into those same problems.
And the strings are much thinner anyway. I mean, you're not going to deal with a 130 guitar string.
Yeah, how many, is it 200-something pounds of force with a bass once it's all strung up, do you know?
I have no idea.
You seem it depends like you might know the answer to that question.
But it would depend on the string and on the
true.
Bass.
But if you like a typical
length.
4-string, I can't remember the number I've heard, but I know it. Yeah. It seems like it would be a lot more than guitar to me.
Oh yeah, for sure. And there are string manufacturers who discuss, what the tension is.
Optimum tension.
And I think that Pyramid does a lot of classical music strings.
Oh, cool.
And so they're very concerned about how the instrument feels and all of that. So they. I think they've designed an optimum relationship of string gauge to sort of balance out the tension.
That's super cool.
But what Phil does, he's kind of crazy. He has a super light low end. I think his B string is a .115.
Wow.
And then his high C string is a .040.
Interesting. I think I put like .46 on one of my 6 strings. So that, if that sounds not ridiculously heavy, I don't know.
That sounds like a typical low E string on a guitar.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to think of, because a high C, I have a 6-string bass, and the one time I bought strings, I want to say I put like a .04, or what did you? Yeah, it was not as light as Phil's high string. It sounded like.
Well, Phil's high string is super heavy. I use a .030
Oh my gosh.
on my C strings.
Oh wow. Okay, so we're talking. So that is a heavy string then.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a really heavy string.
I'm proving how much or how little I know about bass string gauges, especially here. But
So this bass is a lot of fun. It's really easy to play, and it's generally been my number one bass for the last 10 years at least, 13
Awesome.
years. So I played it with Taxi all the time and all of that on the record that I played on and everything, although I think the engineer didn't really quite capture the magic of the tone, but
yeah,
you deal with what you can. And then I have a couple
next
of
time.
other interesting basses to check out.
Yes, please. Let's see them.
And going back further in the Phil world, so this is a 68 EB3. And I got this on eBay for about $700, I think, from a Goodwill store. So, and as you can see, like all my instruments, it is not untouched.
Hey, it's player grade.
Yep. So I took the pickups off, sold them on eBay,
Cool.
and put an alembic bridge. And these are Dark Star pickups.
Who makes Dark? Is Dark Star the brand or?
Yeah. Well, it was. They were made by this guy Fred Hammond.
Okay.
So
I feel like I've heard the name, but maybe not. I don't know.
yeah, he lives out in L.A. He's a huge Jack Cassidy fan.
Okay.
And he also hangs out a lot with Dan Schwartz, who is a bass player so he's got a crazy story. He was 15 years old, and he went to California. This is like I guess 74, 75, something like that. And he went to the Grateful Dead's rehearsal space because he was into them and thought he'd just show up and introduce himself.
Hey.
Hey, what's happening? And he looks up on the wall, and there's a Guild fretless bass with all this inlay in it. And he's like, what's the story with that bass? And I think Rick or one of the other guys were around, and they said, oh, it's Phil's bass. He doesn't ever play it. And so, he goes back to New Jersey, and the Dead come in, and he meets Phil during the set break back when they were accessible. And he's like, hey, Phil, I was just out in California. I saw your bass. What's up with that thing? And he's like, oh, you can have it. So he gets in touch with Rick, and Rick is like, well, all right, I just want somebody to pay me for the inlay that I did. So if you pay me $400 and can come get it, you can have it. I'm not going to ship it.
Oh my.
So he has this amazing bass, and then he's played with a ton of people in LA. He's on all these different records, and he's part of the group that Sheryl Crow came out of. And I think he played on her first album, and
Wow.
and all kinds of people. With Roseanne Cash, he's played with a lot. Great bass player, great guy. And he also has one of the alembics that Fred, I think, owns it, but he has it, which has the whole monster super filter thing.
40 knob. It looks like
The
a
40
Moog
knob
synthesizer.
Yeah, and in fact, apparently the filters go so low, they go like subsonic, then you can send them into oscillation, and when I was at Berkeley, I did that to one of my basses. I had all these electronics books, one of Craig Anderson's books, and he has this state variable filter. And so I built it into one of my basses, and you could turn up the resonance so much that it would oscillate and then
Oh
tune it
my-
into all these different things. So that was really fun,
That's really neat. Experimental, as always. Pushing the
as
boundaries.
always. And oh wait, what have I done here? I'm sorry.
No,
So
you're okay.
right now I'm running it through one of Brad's classic tube preamps.
Very nice. Shout
So-
out Brad Sarno.
Brad Sarno is the best. And this is actually not doing anything. What's the problem?
It was making noise just a second ago.
It
The other
was.
one was.
Yeah, this is actually one of the first ones he made. When I was on the road with Taxi, we were playing St. Louis, and he came down to the gig, and it's like
What year was that?
2008 or 2008, I think. Wow. And so I was playing through the Alembic, and he's like, "Do you want to try this?" And I played through it, and I was like, "Wow, this is awesome. Yeah, I want to play this." And then I was like, "Can I keep this for the rest of the tour?" And he said, "Yeah, all right. Leave your Alembic with me so I can run it through the oscilloscope and check stuff out." And so we did that. And then after that, I was just like, "All right, what do I have to do?"
Yeah, give
So
me one. I need.
the serial number is Demo A. So
Ooh, that's cool.
it is cool. It's, yeah.
I wonder. I want to check my serials now because I'm sure I'm got to be in the hundreds, if not thousands at this point. I have two though, so one is an earlier one, I think. It's when he was using a different kind of faceplate before it went sparkly. You must have a really matte silver.
This has a messed up output jack.
Ah, I heard the classic sound.
So it's an interesting tone.
That's meaty.
Yeah. And the thing I don't like about it is that it feels like there's something on the high end that is sort of clicky and annoying, and I can't really totally get rid of it.
I don't want to say for sure that I can hear it, but I can imagine what you mean. Like, we've all had those instruments with some kind of... Is it a buzz of some kind, or like a ring or a click, or...
I don't know. It's one of those things that bothers me while I play it, and then I hear the recordings, and it's like, well, that's not so bad.
Yeah, it's fine. Who else is going to notice?
Yeah. That bothers me, though.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's basically what I was going after is the Skull and Roses tone.
It sounds spot on to me. And that's a 68.
Yeah, it's a 68, which I think Phil's was actually, well, it's unclear what his was, because he had played an EBO, which is a one pickup version of it, very early on. And some people say that it's that one souped up. But the thing that doesn't seem right is that the holes line up more to an EB3.
I saw an EBO or EB1 within like the last year, and it was a gorgeous instrument. EB1 is
EB1 is the violin-looking one.
Okay, then
that Leslie West played.
Ooh, I'm thinking of an EB O then. That's what I saw.
Yeah, it's just
it was
like
a single
this
pickup.
with one pickup.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
But I've got some alembic pickups and electronics to put in here that I'm sort of curious about.
Very cool.
Haven't
What will you
quite
do with the Dark Star pickups? Are those EB specific, or can you put?
No,
them in
these were
something else?
actually. All right, so here's the story about the Dark Star pickup. Again, one of those things of synergy.
I love it.
So there used to be a bass player's mailing list called The Bottom Line that was
a great name.
throughout the 90s. And, once Facebook and all the other stuff came along on the internet, then it disappeared.
Mailing
But
lists as much.
Yeah, exactly. And so I posted about Phil's EB3 and the pickups that were involved, and then something about how they were from the original Guild Starfires and all of that. And then I get this email from this guy Fred, and he's like, "I saw your post. Where can I get those pickups?" I said, "Well, you can't because they haven't been made since 1970 or 71." And he's like, "Oh, damn." And so it inspired him to reverse engineer it.
Wow.
So I think he got in touch with Dan Schwartz, or I can't imagine it was anybody but Dan, because I'm sure that Dan had some available, and he took it apart, figured out how it worked. And it's a weird pickup because, if you look at it, it looks like a humbucker.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually not a humbucker. It's a single coil, and then so here are the adjustment screws, and here's the pole piece.
Oh.
So you screw that in, these come up.
It's almost like I've thought for the longest time the P90s had weird extra poles or something, but it was the adjustment screws. That's
so, and then they've got this
confusion.
Like lever mechanism on the inside.
Nice. How is that controlled?
You just screw these in and out.
Oh, so you can do
So
both.
you screw. So the screw goes down, hits on this piece of metal, and pushes it up like that.
Brilliant.
So, and it's got the history of it is a little bit weird because they built it with one magnet under here, and then Rick started putting in two magnets. And it turns out that it's built the way that the bobbin is built on the bottom, or whatever part that is. You can slide a second magnet in there, so that it gives it a lot more oomph.
Wow.
So, but yeah, Live Dead was these pickups.
That's so cool.
On the Starfire. And
you have to be the only one who has bothered to go this deep into that project, right? Does anybody else have anything? Like
Dan
this?
Cray has a SG bass that he's done. I think it's more or less like this.
That's cool. Dan's
he even
up
got
near
somebody.
me. I
He got
still
it
want
to
meet him.
Yeah, he even got somebody to paint it, looking like Phil's, which is really
awesome.
cool. I know, it's great. Dan's a great guy.
That's cool. I'd love to talk to him sometime.
Yeah, you should. And then I'm just trying to figure out how to mute this. So
it's all good. I'm muted
deal
in
with it on
post.
that.
Or we'll just give them an honest, hey, this is what happened. We had to unplug a jack.
This is a very early modulus.
Oh, cool.
So when Phil
Shout
started
out
playing, and Jeff,
Rich and Jeff, and remind
Jeff
me
Gould.
Jeff's last name.
Jeff Gould.
Gould. Thank you.
So he was the one that. So he used to work in the aerospace industry, and was working with all kinds of materials for rocket ships and stuff like that. And so he was going to see the Grateful Dead when Phil was using Osiris 73, 74 in that time. And he said, "Why don't you try building a graphite instrument?" And so this is one, there's no serial number on it. It's probably 1982, 83. It's got a very different look.
Oh my God.
On the graphite.
But it has that signature modulus touch to it.
Oh, it totally does. And the other thing is that it's essentially a 4-string neck with 6 strings on it. So it's really a narrow spacing.
Do you call that a bass? That's a bass 6?
No, it's just a bass.
It's just a bass, okay. That's a low B?
That's a low B.
Wow.
So this is a little bit different because I've, as usual, modified it. So
why am I not surprised?
So originally it came with just 2 pickups here.
Okay.
And they were Bartolini pickups. And so this originally belonged to this guy named Roy Vogt, V-O-G-T, who's a session player, fusion player from Nashville.
Nice.
And so the weird thing was, when I got the bass, the action was messed up. It really badly needed a setup, so I took it to Wood Songs, to my friends there who do all my stuff. And we took it apart, and we took out the bridge pickup, and there was a little piece of paper folded under it. And it said, "If found, please call Roy Vogt." So I knew him from the internet, and so I got in touch with him through Talk Bass or something like that. And I was like, "Hey, I've got your bass." And he was like, "Oh, wow, I remember that thing." And he was a finger player, playing like jazz fusion stuff. And there's a video of him playing in a guitar trio, like just crazy fusion. And the string spacing is so tight. This one is a little noisy, I'm afraid, with electronic cell phone stuff.
Hearing some cell phone stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I guess he said he traded it for a fretless of some sort. I think the string spacing was too tight. And it's also got this weird bridge.
That's really cool, though. I love the way that's set in.
Yeah, this part's cool, but this is all made out of graphite, and it doesn't adjust well, and it's...
Gotcha.
It's sort of weird. Phil had the same thing on his. So he played one like this, 82, 83, and then eventually got the third pickup on a different one. And his had a brass bridge, which I think would be better. But if I could find a bridge with a narrow enough spacing, I would probably just replace all this.
That's so interesting. When you brought it out, I don't know much about a bass 6, but it's some kind of bass. There's these builders that built my sort of Jerry-looking guitar, and they would build these bass guitar hybrid things, and the spacing is almost exactly like that. So,
well, there was a Fender bass called the Bass 6.
That's what I'm thinking of, yeah.
And it had a whammy bar.
Yeah,
and
like very weird kind of hybrid.
Yeah, it's sort of like in between a bass guitar and a baritone guitar, something like that.
Baritone was the word I was looking for, too.
And the craziest time I've ever seen one was this band called Massacre, which was Bill Laswell playing one of those. I don't know if you know him.
I did know that name, but I don't know why.
Yeah, he's a maniac. So,
okay.
And he was playing it through like a Marshall stack using the whammy bar and everything. And then the drummer was this guy, Anton Fear, who was... killer punk drummer.
Wow.
Not normally what you'd think of as punk, but just ferocious drummer. And then the guitar player was this guy, what's his name? Fred Frith, who, he's one of those people that is like right up my alley in terms of experimental stuff.
Cool.
And so he was playing electric guitar, and he was doing stuff that was everything from like very Pat Metheny-esque to having prepared guitars on the table and sort of wanging on them with weird metal sticks and objects and massive feedback and squalls of noise and
Colonel Bruce and Egyptian windmill operators style.
Oh, way beyond. And actually one of the best shows I ever saw was with him and let me get back in the picture here.
There you go.
This guy Hans Reichel, Reichel, and he's this German guy who built his own instruments, and he had guitars where the bridge would be in the middle of the neck, and he could play either side, and there were frets on both sides and pickups all over the place, and just this weird like alien music. And then the crazy thing he had was the thing he called the doxophone, and so it was basically a C-clamp with a pickup built into it. And then all these things that looked like strange spatulas. And he would C-clamp them to a table and then hit them with like a bass bow. And then what looked sort of like a sanding block, curved on one side. Yeah. And then he'd have some of them that were fretted and some that were fretless. And then run them through amplifiers and effects. And, it would sound like everything from alien choirs of heavenly beauty to just like undersea farts and, it's brilliant. He's got some records out that you have to check out.
I have to watch this. When I edit this podcast, I will try to go through and like make a collection of the names because I have a list that's way too big for me to even keep track of at this point. That's awesome.
So Edwin. Fred was playing acoustic guitar. It was an acoustic evening with Fred and Hans.
Wow.
And, Fred had his acoustic guitar out there, and it took him 45 minutes to get around to like pressing a string down and plucking it. He's running strings through it and, paper clips and,
Oh my God.
it was the best.
What a beauty. You have definitely turned me on to the abnormalities in music that I have a new appreciation for them, and I haven't even listened to music in a minute. So
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go back and kind of look at it with a new perspective.
There's a lot out there.
There sure is. And I want to hear, does your grandfather have published recordings?
No,
Or?
he never published.
Okay.
So he came from a very privileged situation. So he never had to work a job and try to sell his music. So there was a pianist who made an album of his music.
Compositions.
But, the way she plays it and the way he plays it are just very different. So
Okay.
when I was at Berkeley and a little bit afterwards, I made a couple of recordings of him. So I'd be happy to share those.
I would love to hear those. That would be really cool.
And then after he passed, he told me, I hate canned music. Music doesn't exist unless it's live.
Yeah, okay.
And
oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
he's old school. He's born in 1907. And
Music. That's such an
canned
interesting
music.
way to describe it, too.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so after he passed, we were going through his belongings, and I discovered a box of reel-to-reel tapes from the late 60s and early 70s that he'd made.
Whoa.
So I've transferred all of that stuff to digital. And
That's really cool. That mind-blowingly cool, and what a neat connection to have that musical generational leap from grandfather to grandson. It's so neat.
Yeah. But I was never on his level. He was one of those people who could sight read figured bass, and you could just go up and put random fingers on the piano and he'd tell you exactly what notes you were playing. And
Truly.
that's
he was mind operating just way out of our
and all of his music was based on philosophy and art, and
Wow.
he had this idea that each individual interval would affect human beings in a certain way, so that that became the basis for his harmony. And so he had these different maps of like consonance to dissonance and things like that.
That's awesome.
That he wrote out. And then at the end of his life, he about 2 years before he died, he's like, oh no, this is wrong. I've got to start all over again. He's like in his
Wow.
mid 80s, just like, and he was having heart attacks, and I'd go visit him in the hospital, and he's surrounded by music paper and furiously writing. It's like,
That's beautiful, though.
it is.
That's
so
the way-
inspiring.
Oh my God.
And my family are all artists. My mom is a sculptor,
Awesome.
and she's done, she did a monument of Eleanor Roosevelt that's in Riverside Park in New York City. And,
Wow.
my dad's a printmaker and was chairman of the visual arts department. And, so they're never going to retire. That's
Why
not
would
what you do.
Yeah.
And my wife too, Dawn, is, she's, last year she was, received the Golden Pear for being the best independent perfumer in Amsterdam.
Oh my God.
And
Congrats
she's-
to her.
Oh, she's
She's hanging out.
she's the
loving
rock
it.
star in the family. She's known all over the world, and
That's incredible.
she's a pioneer, and she basically created her own career. And when she started, nobody came into perfume as an artist, as a visual artist.
Yeah.
And so she's done collaborations with the Denver Art Museum. When they did an impressionist flower show, they hired her to do a installation in a room which was a scent impression of walking through Monet's garden.
Damn. Couldn't
And
have picked a better person to work on.
I know.
that.
She's just brilliant.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah, I sort of feel like a black sheep in this family. And my grandfather, or my uncle, my mom's little brother, was an architect, and he got into some crazy stuff. He first got known for books he wrote about the Bauhaus movement, and then he basically brought the concept of postmodernism into architecture.
Gee.
And then later, this is a whole other story. I don't know. You can edit all this stuff out, but he married into this family in England that started the Opium Wars.
Holy shit.
So yeah, his his wife's great 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 uncle, however many generations back, was a younger son in England, and in England the younger sons inherit nothing because they keep the estates together. So he went to medical school, but he wasn't that great at it. So he got a license to practice medicine on ships because they needed doctors. So he did that for a while, and he was good at that. And he, in those days, these are the sailing ships of the 19th century.
Yeah.
Once you become part of the crew, they give you some space in the hold to do your own trading, and you develop connections, and he did all of that. And then they got shipwrecked, and there was one other guy who survived, and so he had a lot of connections in China, and this other guy had connections in India, and so they cooked up the scheme to bring Indian opium to China. Wow. And yeah, it's crazy. So they did all that, and then the Chinese objected and impounded their fleet, and then they called in the British Navy, and so that company that they had started still exists, and his wife's family still runs it. And so his wife, when she was 8 years old, they helped found Hong Kong, and those books Taipan and Shogun are about their family.
Oh my God.
And so when she was 8 years old, they were in China, and the Cultural Revolution happened, and they were the running dog capitalists that the Chinese were revolting against. And so they were placed under house arrest, and they were going to be executed, and they had to sneak out of the country, and
Jesus.
all this crazy stuff. I know. So anyway, my uncle's mother-in-law, Lady Claire Kessick, said to him, we went and visited on our honeymoon in '95. We went up to Scotland and went to the estate and everything. And Lady Claire had just gotten open heart surgery. She's like 95 years old and running around like a fiend. She's amazing.
Oh my gosh.
When she was 17 years old, there was some guy who really wanted to marry her and kept pestering her, and her brother was living in Paris and said, no, that's not going to happen. You're coming with me to Paris. And that was I think in the 20s. So it was during the time, all the expats and the writers and artists and, that whole bohemian scene. And she was 17 years old in the middle of all that stuff.
Jeez. I can't even imagine.
So she told my uncle, look, I know that when I pass away, you're going to do something crazy with this estate. So do it now so I can see it. And so he built the Garden of Cosmic Speculation, which is this huge landscape architecture installation based on post-Einsteinian physics. And my aunt, because she grew up in the Chinese culture, was one of the first Western experts on Chinese gardens and feng shui and, all this stuff.
What a cultural exchange. And
I know. So, my family are all overachievers, and I'm like a musician, so.
Hey. You're a damn good musician at that, man.
I do what I can.
I have enjoyed talking to you so much. This has been an incredible treat to hear your story, and to go from the occasional well-written Facebook comment and always, oh, nice, there's Edwin. I like seeing what he has to say, to hearing this and hearing about your life and listening to your thought. It's been so nice, and I'm truly without words, I guess. What a cool story you've lived.
Well, still moving on from here. So
yeah, I know there's a lot to still happen, and hopefully we can. I don't want to talk about COVID, but wish we could play shows right now, and I wish I could see you in the future in a musical capacity, and so hopefully that will one day.
It would be great to play together.
Do you ever come up to Massachusetts to visit home base?
Yeah.
Previous home base.
Absolutely. My parents still live in Newton, and
awesome.
I grew up on Cape Cod.
Very cool.
Wellfleet and Truro. In fact, I was named after Edwin Dickinson, one of the first artists to go to Provincetown.
Wow.
In 1912, who was a friend of my grandparents and a mentor of my mom. So
how cool.
Deep roots.
That's truly incredible. Well, when you're in Mass, please let me know, and I would love to meet you in person.
Where are you?
I'm right next to Worcester, so.
Oh, my dad grew up in Worcester.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I know, right?
That's amazing. I love how this world works.
It's so true.
It's awesome. Well, this has been a marathon of a podcast. I am so happy
Yeah, you might have to chop it up. But
Hey, it's okay. If you don't mind, I'd put it out because I enjoyed every moment. So we just go from start to finish.
all right,
I love it. Edwin, thank you so much.
my
It's
pleasure.
been a blast. I hope that you can come back on another time and we can maybe zone in on something specific too. If you ever
Yeah.
have any ideas, let me
Anytime
know.
if you want to talk about music theory or
Yeah.
stuff
There's a
like
lot
that.
to be said, or maybe a panel. I don't know. I'm still working out ideas, but
Yeah.
that was huge that you played some basses and showed us instruments. It's so cool.
Yeah, and I'm gonna have to come out with a bass because I also want to hook up with Jason.
Oh man,
And do
Jason
some playing with
Ferguson
him.
or
Yeah.
Schrinner or which,
Well, Jason, he lives out on the West Coast, but Jason Ferguson is up in New York and
Yep.
sort of near my wife's stomping ground. So,
very cool.
yeah.
I can't wait to see that happen when that happens because you guys have incredible minds. So
Yeah, I
Wow.
love Jason. All these guys. I mean, it's been one of the silver linings of COVID is now people are focusing online and
Yep.
the community has just really come together.
I don't think we would have done this
Not
without
like this.
COVID. I would have never thought, hey, I want to like sit and Zoom people that I've never talked to.
Well, I've got to give you mad props for doing that because it's awesome.
man.
It's so awesome.
It's fun. I was tired of not knowing enough stuff up here, so I had to reach out to the actual experts and see what they had to say about things. So I'm learning a lot every day, and thanks to people like yourself. So this has been really cool.
All right. Well, thanks, Jay.
Awesome, man. Thank you, Edwin. This has been a blast. And yeah, peace. Till next time.
You got it.
Awesome.